Good afternoon. I'm calling the meeting of the Community Development Committee together on Tuesday, September 3rd, 2019. Second item of business is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Atlas Ingebrigtsen moves. Lee seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Approval of the minutes. The August 19th, 2019 minutes of the regular meeting of the committee were included with the agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Cummings moves.
Second.
Atlas Ingebrigtsen seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. We'll move on to item number 4, business. Number 1, 2019-241 JT, the City of Crystal 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. Mr. Larson, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Again, I'm Mike Larson, Senior Planner and Local Planning Assistant in the Community Development Division. Before you now is the 2040 City of Crystal Comprehensive Plan. We do not have any representatives from the City of Crystal here today. They were not able to attend. This map shows the location of regional systems within the City of Crystal. All wastewater generated within the city is conveyed through the council's interceptor. All flow is treated at the council's Metropolitan Wastewater Treatment Center in St. Paul. Regional highway system elements include Minnesota Trunk Highway 100. Regional transit system elements include the planned Metro Blue Line extension with a station at Bass Lake Road. And of course, regional aviation system elements include the Crystal Lake Airport, and regional trail system elements include the Bassett Creek and Crystal Lake regional trails, as well as the search corridor for the CP Rail Extension regional trail. As shown in Figure 2 of your staff report, Thrive MSP 2040 designates the City of Crystal as urban. Crystal is located in east central Hennepin County, surrounded by the communities of Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center, Robbinsdale, Golden Valley, and New Hope. Table 1, also in your staff report, shows that between 2018 and 2040, the council forecasts that the city will grow by 156 households and 1,000 jobs. I want to note that, however, recent population and household growth in the city has outpaced what was expected in the short term. But during the plan review process, although council staff had recommended a forecast adjustment to the City of Crystal, at that point, the city declined to initiate that. That red box kind of highlights where we are, at 2018 versus the 2020 forecast. So you can see that those have been surpassed. Table 2 from the staff report shown here illustrates the planned residential density for the city, which includes acreage that the city has identified for potential redevelopment and its associated guiding land use. Policy for the most intense land uses in the city, likely areas for redevelopment, and allocation of the city's growth are, as you might expect, are largely associated with stationary planning around the Bass Lake Road station on the Metro Blue Line extension, as well as some infill opportunities along Douglas Drive. The minimum planned density expectation for urban communities is 20 units per acre, 10 units per acre. Crystal is consistent with this policy, with a potential overall density range of 21.4 to 43.4. This figure, also shown as Figure 3 in your staff report, shows a pattern of existing land uses in Crystal. The city experienced most of its early development in the 1950s and 60s. The city has a retail concentration centered on Bass Lake Road and West Broadway Avenue, shown here in the red ellipse, as well as an adjacent concentration of industrial uses where the BNSF and CP railroads cross the city. So obviously the Crystal Airport is a minor reliever airport in the regional system of airports. The airport mainly serves small propeller-driven aircrafts with about approximately 10 passenger seats or less. So that gives you indication of the kind of traffic that happens at the Crystal Airport. One interesting fact about the city of Crystal that you probably are familiar with are its jagged boundaries. Um, the city includes an exclave completely surrounded by the city of New Hope, as well as an enclave of the city of New Hope completely surrounded by the city of Crystal. And I won't give you a whole history lesson on that, but it had to do with politics in 1936.
If we want the history lesson, will you come back?
I know, Madam Chair, I know a little bit more, but I'm not, not steeped in that history. I wanted to add a little flavor to the presentation. This slide shows the city's planned land use map, which is also figure 4 in your staff report. The city is setting the stage for transit-oriented development in and around the Bass Lake Road Station area, which is largely now a low-density retail area. The city has participated in station area planning and has established a new mixed-use district, here shown on the map, that encompasses the immediate station area. So one thing I wanted to highlight that the city is doing in terms of TOD is transforming Becker Park, which is located adjacent to the future station along the south side of Bass Lake Road. Previously home to ball fields, the newly redesigned park will become more of a center for the community. So we'll have a variety of uses that include play areas, shaded patios, an interactive fountain, a performance lawn, and ice skating. This project, I believe, will be done by next year. And this, and to give a plug for integrated planning, the project will also includes a stormwater gallery beneath the lawn area, which will reduce phosphorus runoff to nearby Twin Lake. The proposed findings for you today from staff are that the plan conforms to Metropolitan system plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent local government units and affected jurisdictions. The meeting schedule is this item will be before the Environment Committee on next week on the 10th, followed by full council action to authorize the plan on September 25th. Proposed action for you today is to authorize the City of Crystal to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect and to advise the city to implement advisory comments in the review record related to water supply. And Madam Chair, with that concludes my presentations. I'm available for questions.
Questions or comments? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question of curiosity. When the city declined to the suggested increase in population, why would a city choose to do that? Are there implications that varies?
Well, Madam Chair, Councilmember Cummings, typically a community is not willing to make, it adds to the additional workload by the city. It affects a number of areas in the plan. I think in some cases, communities are concerned about how it may affect consultant contracts, doing modeling work. This is a very small amount of growth, and we've worked with a number of communities to make modifications that don't have significant impacts on their planning effort. I think, as I mentioned, we had a similar case with the last committee's presentations with about the city of Richfield. It was in a similar case. Our wastewater planners, transportation planners monitor what's going on in cities on an annual basis. And in both of these cases, we do not identify any potential system issues with regard to this, but it is the city's, they're able to tell us whether or not they're interested in doing that. The obligation is to plan for forecasts that are associated with the system statement that was released.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Lee.
Councilmember Cummings asked my question, but my follow-up would be, how often do cities kind of rebuke our numbers, and what does that mean? What if we're both wrong and the growth is actually higher or bigger? How does that impact us in the future?
Well, Madam Chair, Councilmember Lee, um, I think both the region and the cities monitor growth and development on an annual basis. Uh, we do survey each of the communities in terms of building permits. We collect data in terms of sewer connections. So we do have a good track record in terms of monitoring present day conditions and tracking that against forecasts. When we do system planning, we're particularly with regard to wastewater planning, we're not planning for an exact amount of development, but we do consider capacity beyond the 2040 planning horizon. So in many cases, deviation from the forecast or forecasts that are less accurate than others don't raise to the level of a potential system planning issue. And if we are pacing ahead, we do have time to make adjustments in our capital improvement planning. In many cases, we've been experiencing growth and redevelopment in fully developed areas, and that is consistent with our policies. So it is a good problem to have. Um,
Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Larson, it's nice to see the progress of the Becker Park design, which is part of your figure 4 on page 8 on the presentation. I remember as a part of the Blue Line Extension Station Area Planning, the initial designs, and to see it come to this point and to actually drive down Bass Lake Road and see the construction is pretty cool. I am, however, curious, and I think it was mentioned in an earlier presentation that there would be some changes on the north side of Bass Lake Road near the park. Is that correct, or are you knowledgeable about that?
Madam Chair, Council Member, would you please elaborate what you mean by changes?
There are businesses on the north side of Bass Lake Road across the street.
Sure. That's correct. Madam Chair, Councilmember, I'm not familiar with whether or not particular properties or businesses might be changing in the near future. I just don't have that level of detail for you today.
Okay.
I know that the guiding land use in the plan would support redevelopment of higher density mixed use, but I believe the city does support its established kind of Main Street character businesses there. So I don't think there's a desire to force those businesses out, but to provide opportunities for those businesses.
Great.
In my just general sense, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So any further discussion? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the proposed action?
I would
Ms.
move. I also have a comment
Sure.
to make. I had a great meeting with City of Crystal. It was the last of my communities that I got to meet with, but we had a wonderful conversation and got to look more at the Becker Park plan and also some of the pedestrian improvements in the area that I think are really meaningful to providing a nicely dense area walkability. There's other 2 places in the spirit of Wendy Wolf. I'm feeling competitive. If you need to find a place to eat, Milton's is a restaurant on Douglas and Crystal, which is phenomenal. So I encourage everybody to do that. And then there's a Bassett Creek Park that I live very close to this area, but had never visited this park. It's fairly sizable and has a nice pond, and kids bike there to fish, and a wonderful dog park and zip line in the park if you have little ones that is really attractive to them. And what do they call it? Frisbee golfs. Yes, the Frisbee golfs there too. So it's a great place. So I'm really happy to move approval of this comp plan.
So we have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Lee seconds. Motion by Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? I don't know if Zagat still does the restaurant reviews, but maybe the Met Council could come up, the Community Development Committee, we could do our own Zagat reviews. Just suggesting. Okay, Jake Riley, we have a presentation on item number 2, 2019-242 JT, City of Greenwood 2040 Comp Plan.
Thank you, Chair Vento. Welcome. I'm going to have two in a row here. And so I will only introduce the zoning administrator for the city of Greenwood and Woodland once. That's Dale Cooney, and he's here to answer questions if you may have them. And I'd like to thank Dale, the city's administrator, Dana Young, and the elected officials in both Greenwood and Woodland for their help working on the plan. So as noted, I'm Jake Riley. I'm the sector representative for District 3. And today before you, we have first the City of Greenwood's comprehensive plan. The regional systems in Greenwood is of note is basically the Lake Minnetonka LRT Regional Trail, which is managed by the Three Rivers Park District. It sort of goes right through the city, which is effectively a peninsula. Or perhaps it's an isthmus. I don't really know the difference between the two. I should look that up. The community designation for the city of Greenwood is suburban. It's located in south central Hennepin County on Lake Minnetonka and is surrounded by the communities of Deep Haven, Shorewood, and Excelsior. Forecasted growth for the city of Greenwood is a decrease in population by about 30 people, and the number of households will stay the same at 300. There is forecast to be an increase of 20 jobs in the city at in the same time frame. The existing land uses in Greenwood are 70% residential, as shown on this map. Commercial uses make up less than 4% of the land area in the city. Much of the area of the city is also the lake. And the plan's vision and goals focus on protecting natural and historic resources and maintaining the existing character of those residential neighborhoods. As stated, Lake Minnetonka represents a significant natural resource in the city, and land use policies in Greenwood prohibit development within 50 feet of the lake shore. Existing residential density in Greenwood is 2.24 units per acre. For Greenwood, we have the planned residential density and the 20% planned land use together on the same map, and which shows the city's future land use, which is figure 4 in your staff report. The city doesn't anticipate any household growth as reflected in the forecast. Overall density for guided residential land is expected to be between 2.24, the existing density, and 2.9 units per acre, which is inconsistent with Thrive land use policies. As you know, communities with a suburban designation under Thrive are expected to plan for forecasted population and household growth at an overall average density of at least 5 units per acre for new development and redevelopment. The City of Greenwood's plan identifies the city as with really only one vacant parcel available for new construction and or redevelopment. There's no acreage identified as available for redevelopment and no land anticipated to be redeveloped during the time frame other than a similar exists. It identifies that subdivisions of lots greater than 30,000 square feet as possible, but given a minimum lot size of 15,000 square feet, the greatest density anticipated is the 2.9 units per acre. And given previous development patterns, the lack of planned residential development and growth or redevelopment opportunities within the planning timeframe, the consideration that the city's household growth is not forecasted to increase between 2020 and 2040, staff find that this is not an underutilization of the wastewater system, and therefore the plan is not more likely than not to have a substantial impact on or contain a substantial departure from metropolitan systems. So therefore our proposed findings are that the plan conforms to the metropolitan system plans, is consistent with council policies for forecasts, housing, water supply, and community and subsurface sewage treatment systems, and is inconsistent with council policies for water resources, the Thrive MSP 2040, and land use, and it is compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. The meeting schedule, like Crystal before, the Environment Committee will hear this item on Tuesday, September 10th, and the full council will consider it on Wednesday, September 25th. I do want to remind you that Mr. Cooney, the zoning administrator and author of the plan, is in the audience if you have any questions. And with that, your proposed action is to authorize the City of Greenwood to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect and advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for forecast, land use, and water.
Questions? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the City of Greenwood comprehensive
moved.
plan? Lee moves. Second. Johnson seconds. Any discussion on the motion to approve? Seeing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Hey, thank you. Mr. Riley, next.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Vento. Council members. So now before you is the City of Woodland's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. And Dale is still here, although he may need to leave. He does have a council meeting tonight, so I think we'll be fine. He'll stay as long as he can. The regional systems for the City of Woodland. There are no components to the regional system within the City of Woodland. The closest component is a search corridor in Minnetonka for a trail. And that's to the sort of southeast corner of the community designation for Woodland is also suburban. It is also located in central Hennepin County on Lake Minnetonka and is surrounded by different communities, the communities of Wayzata, Minnetonka, and Deep Haven. Forecasted growth for the City of Woodland is a decrease of 10 in population and no change in households or jobs in the same time frame. Woodland doesn't actually have any job centers. It is entirely residential and wetlands and lakes. And that's shown on the map here. The plan's vision and goals focus on promoting the existing character of the community and maintaining the natural resources in the community, which include forested areas, lakes, and substantial wetlands. The three lakes are Lake Marion, Lake Minnetonka, and Shavers Lake. Many people just sort of lump them all in as part of Lake Minnetonka, but those lakes make up 16% of the area encompassed by the municipal boundary, which is sort of an interesting fact. And residential land uses occupy 91% of the city's land area, and wetlands the remaining 9%. The proposed 2040 land use for Woodland, as shown in Figure 4 on your staff report and on the slide here, does not anticipate any household growth. Therefore, it is the same as the existing land use. It's consistent with land use and residential density policies for the suburban community designation because Thrive calls for suburban communities to plan for forecasted population and household growth at 5 units per acre in Seward areas. And in the City of Woodland's case, no growth is forecast for the city, and most housing units are served by the subsurface sewage treatment systems, SSTS septic systems. And the city has no plans to expand the sewer system or sewer service provided to the community. So in carrying forward guided land uses from the 2030 plan, there are no anticipated changes to the development patterns. The proposed findings for the City of Woodland is that it conforms to Metropolitan System plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. As the community before, the Environment Committee will hear this item on Tuesday, September 10th, and the full council on Wednesday, September 25th. And we are both still here to answer questions. The proposed action that you're considering then today is to authorize the City of Woodland to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect and advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for housing and water supply.
Any questions? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve 2019-243 JT?
Motion to approve.
Chambliss moves to approve. Second.
Second?
Cummings seconds. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Jake. Our next item is 2019-244 JT, City of North St. Paul 2040 Plan with Corinne Wendell.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and council members. Thank you. My name is Corinne Wendell, Sector Representative for Districts 11 and 12. I'll be presenting this item to you this afternoon. We have the City of North St. Paul. So the map shown here shows the location and the regional components for the City of North St. Paul. So Highway 36 runs across the city, kind of in that east to west direction. And then Highway 120 runs north-south along the eastern edge of the city. Ramsey County is the park implementing agency for the regional park system components in the city. However, there are no regional park system components. However, the plan does appropriately acknowledge the state lands within the city, including the Gateway State Trail. In terms of community designation, this community is designated as urban, and so North St. Paul is located in northeastern Ramsey County and is surrounded mostly by Maplewood to the northwest and south, but then it also has the city of Oakdale and the Washington County border to the east of the community. For their forecasted growth, as shown in Table 1 of your staff report, between 2020 and 2040, there is very little movement, with the population staying the same, but there will be a decrease in households by about 200. Their residential density shown here, and also Table 2 of your staff report, shows that the overall density for the community will be between 10.31 and 30.09 units per acre. Communities with that urban designation under Thrive expect for having planned growth for household growth at an average density of at least 10 units per acre, and that's for new development and redevelopment. And so with it being 10.31, North St. Paul's plan is consistent with that policy. For the existing land use for North St. Paul, the current acreage of North St. Paul is about 3 square miles, or about 1,900 acres. The vast majority in the city is single-family housing, with nearly 60%. That's that yellow color that you see there is the residential. They also have a lot of parks and recreational spaces within the community, including schools and city property and churches, and that accounts for about 16% of the land use. And for their 2040 future land use map, Figure 4 in your staff report, the plan accommodates for the forecasted growth between now and 2040 through redevelopment. And so the map shows the different land uses in terms of their low and medium density residential, a mixed multifamily residential, downtown mixed use, transitional mixed use, corridor mixed use. They have a variety of mixed use categories, and then also parks. And so that definitely supports their small scale retail buildings in their commercial corridor, as well as their service businesses and offices. And so redevelopment with the future land use map is likely to occur both along Highway 120 and 36, and then McKnight Avenue and 36. So I also like to mention North St. Paul does have a strong history of incorporating their small area plans into their comprehensive plan. So they have small area plans such as the Living Streets Plan, the Redevelopment Master Plan, the Downtown Design Manual, and so the city does emphasize their downtown. They actually have an entire chapter dedicated to downtown, which is really great. And as you can see in this aerial map, you know, it really is part of the character of the city. It's located along 7th Avenue, the heart of the city, home to Friday night car shows, parades, gatherings, and is a key contributor to the city's identity. So they do a great job highlighting that in their plan and in their activities. And so with that, the proposed findings is that the plan conforms to the Metropolitan System Plan, is consistent with council policy and proposed changes, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent and local governmental units in affected jurisdictions. The meeting schedule for this plan, they will see the Environment Committee on the 10th and then the full council on the 25th. Although there weren't any representatives from the city, I would also just like to take a minute to thank them for all of their hard work with the plan and their kind of corresponding and being able to give us some really great policies that we've looked at in their plan. So they've been a great city to work with, as all of our cities are, but I'd like to thank them for that. And with that, the proposed action is to authorize the City of North St. Paul to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect and to revise the city's forecast downward as shown in Table 1 of the attached review record. Also revise the city's allocation of affordable housing need to 25 units and to advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for transportation and water resources, surface water management, and water supply. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions you may have. Thank you.
Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Chair. On slide 8, and I appreciate the detail of sharing the downtown plan, and really love the idea of having green space be a part of a downtown plan. But I'm curious in the notes section about number 4, it says not appropriate for park. I'm just curious what that means.
So would that be in the legend?
In slide 4, there's like a notes. It's not the legend. There's a notes area.
Yes.
Right, lower right.
Yeah.
Yes, Madam Chair, Council Member, it is sometimes happening in small area plans where they have the community engagement for the community, and they will bring out this map. Actually, as I will share as the former city planner for this community, so as a part of some of these discussions back when. And so in those community engagement sessions, they will ask the business owners and residents the areas along 7th where they feel that the community would be better served by different businesses in parks or open space or sort of a transitional space. And so sometimes there's areas where they would not like to have a use, whatever that may be, whether it's a park or commercial space. And so they would identify that on the map ahead of time. So this is sort of a conceptual map, kind of showing their thoughts on what they would like for their downtown.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move.
Atlas Ingebrigtsen moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Lee seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. I'd like to add, as this is part of my district, and North St. Paul is a cool town. I have a real affinity to communities that have a sense of community, and this one does. And what you said about the classic cars on Friday night is very true. If you don't get there early and get your spot, you're in trouble because it's a big deal. And people come from miles and miles, western Wisconsin and St. Cloud area and down around Rochester. They'll all flood to North St. Paul. The other thing about downtown North St. Paul is they have some wonderful antique shops and consignment shops. So if you're into that, I'd encourage you to check it out because it's pretty fun. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
The next item under business, our last item under business, 2019-245, the Housing Trust Fund Program Grant Renewal Board Resolution number 2019-21. Jennifer Keogh. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Council members. Again, my name is Jennifer Keogh, and I'm the manager of the Metro HRA. The item before you tonight is that the Metropolitan Council adopt Resolution 2019-21 as required by the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency to authorize the Director of the Housing and Redevelopment Authority to execute a grant agreement for the Housing Trust Fund Program renewal of $729,521. So I thought it would be nice to provide you with some context and some history of the program. In 2002, the Metro HRA began administering what was called the Rental Assistance for Anoka County, or we called RAC. We like our acronyms in the housing world. And it was funded through the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. The RAC program was formed after the Minnesota welfare reform in 2000 that implemented at that time a maximum MFIT benefit period for 60 months. The RAC program was meant to provide a shallow subsidy of $400 per month for working families. And the idea behind the program was to assist families as they worked with their employment counselors to become self-sufficient and free of public assistance. Over time, from 2002 until about 2015, we started seeing some trends in the program, and participants were not increasing their earned income with the assistance of the employment counselors as planned. And we kind of think that was a sign of the times of what was happening within the economy. That shallow subsidy of $400 simply, we realized, isn't enough to help stabilize families. So in 2017, early 2018, we started having conversation with our funder, which is Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. And we talked about changing the subsidy structure and the eligibility of the program. The program has been funded under what's called the Housing Trust Fund. And we had an opportunity to look at how we could better align and meet the goals of Minnesota Housing, which was to provide rent assistance to those with the highest barriers to housing stability and to serve high priority homeless, and then also provide a deeper subsidy to stabilize families that would mirror that Section 8 housing choice voucher calculation. So we made a proposal in our grant application this year that would allow for that. And I will get to a little bit of that in a second. In addition to the current grant structure, Minnesota Housing made funds available for the first time this year for what's called housing navigation services. Those were the first time that Minnesota Housing has offered that. And we were very excited about that and applied. And we were awarded $40,000 in housing navigation funds. And we're going to be using that to do pre-move counseling with families, to do housing search assistance, to work to recruit landlords and engage with them, to do tenant-landlord mediation when necessary, and to make referrals for community resources. So we applied for funding under the new subsidy structure, and we were awarded $689,521. This grant is given out on a biennium basis, so it would be a 2-year grant, October 1st, 2019 through the end of September of 2021. And again, we would have funding to serve families of $689,521, the housing navigation of $40,000, so our total funding is $729,521. Again, the proposed action before you is to adopt the resolution 2019-21 as required by Minnesota Housing to authorize the Director of the Housing and Redevelopment Authority to execute a grant agreement for the Housing Trust Fund program renewal funding of $729,521. And with that, I will take any questions you may have.
Questions? Cummings.
Madam Chair.
Yes,
Is,
Councilmember Cummings. I'm sorry, I'm being a little casual.
Is Anoka County the only county that we perform this task with?
Madam Chair, Council Member, yes, that's our partnership is with Anoka County.
In only with Anoka County?
Correct, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Motion to approve. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Okay, Ms. Chambliss moves. Who would like to second? Lee would like to second? Okay. Any discussion? I'm really fumbling here. I apologize. Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson. I'm going to start giving you all new names here shortly. So.
Thanks, Chair. I guess I'm curious. We don't have another program like this for any other community. We've had it for a long time, but why are we doing this? Are these funds not funds that other communities access? Do they manage it in a different way, or?
Madam Chair, Council Member, so the program started under a pot of money called the Housing Trust Fund back in the 2000s, and the identified need at that time was in this partnership with Anoka County. And so right now I think there was $23 million allocated under the Housing Trust Fund. We are one of 26 recipients in the state of Minnesota that receive Housing Trust Fund dollars. Each community or each housing authority that applies for those dollars, it's unique to their community. And I could recall Terry Smith from a historical standpoint of maybe why Anoka County was selected at the time. Is that where you're going?
Chair, I guess I'm curious. It seems like kind of a bit of a one-off, and maybe it isn't, but that's what it seems like. And so I guess I'm trying to confirm if it is. And if so, why are we doing that? And if there are other counties in our region that do it differently. Why is this one done this way?
If I may, Madam Chair.
Yes, Ms. Smith.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair and Council Member. When this was initially set up, and Jennifer alluded to this, we had a partnership with Anoka County because that was the identified need. And I suppose way back in 1996, probably when, or 2002, you said, when we initially applied for this grant, it's likely that Anoka County reached out to us to say, hey, there's this housing trust fund money available. Would you be our partner and apply for some of this? We'll work with the families towards self-sufficiency. You can be the subsidy provider. So that's how all of our unique partnerships and our special programs have evolved over the years, is, you know, working with partners to meet the need at the time. And I think it's gone, that's probably how it happened. And we still have 40 or so families on this program, and we don't want to displace those current families. So it's as vouchers turn over, we will refill them with Anoka County remaining as our partner because they were our partner in the beginning. So there are, you know, we had a Ramsey County program that was specific to Ramsey County that we no longer have, but like our new transit vouchers for the new vouchers to provide housing vouchers for people experiencing homelessness on the transit system. That's a new partnership that we have today, and in 10 years maybe the needs will change in the region to morph into something else. But I think it's just been a long-term partnership that we are continuing and committed to Anoka County, so we will continue that commitment to serve the Anoka County families.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you. I'm getting over a cold. I do not believe I'm contagious, but I sound awful. So picking up on that question too. So my question is, when you look at the region we serve, are there gaps where this money isn't getting into partnerships or need in whatever way has been identified? I think that would be my question. So it's great that Anoka County is getting it, but we serve more than Anoka County. So how else is money from the trust fund getting to recipients?
Ms. Smith.
So, Madam Chair and Council Member Johnson, we don't have any other trust fund money in the Housing Authority. There are other partnerships now. I will say collectively there are 10 housing authorities in the region. Most of the housing authorities have not entertained these boutique type programs. We call them boutique programs because they're different than the standard Section 8 program. So we can look into where the other housing trust fund dollars were awarded and what types of projects they were awarded to. And to answer your question, the need is so much greater than what's available for all resources. And so, you know, I think that Minnesota Housing's first priority is to continue to fund existing grants. And whether there are new opportunities to apply for Housing Trust Fund additional money, I know that's not available right now. You know, it's something we're always talking with our partners about, our funding partners. So it doesn't directly answer, but partially.
Madam Chair, no, it does. I mean, I guess I'm wanting to know that historically or currently there are opportunities for others in the region, whether they partnered with us or not, to access funds when they become available. And this is just one that was early on, has been useful, and we want to continue to do it that way. That's what I'm hearing, so.
Ms. Smith.
Madam Chair, if I may, and Councilmember Johnson, we have what's called a continuum of care program that serves people experiencing homelessness, and we have partnerships with Ramsey, Hennepin, and Anoka for that program. So depending on the program, the Metro HRA serves in some parts 7 counties, some parts 3 counties, some parts 1 county, just depending on the program.
Any other discussion? Okay, hearing none, we have a motion to approve the Metropolitan Council Resolution 2019-21 as required by the Minnesota Housing to authorize the Director of the Housing and Redevelopment Authority to execute a grant for the Housing Trust Fund in the amount of $729,521. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Ms. Keel.
Thank you.
And we're going to move on to the information items and start with Ms. Smith. Um, an introduction to the Metropolitan Housing and Redevelopment Authority operating budget. But before I turn the microphone over to you, I want to congratulate you on the recent recognition you received from the Minnesota chapter of the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials. Congratulations. It's a wonderful recognition of your career excellence and leadership. And I believe it was Ms. Keogh who described your open-minded and solution-focused approach to your work. And on behalf of the committee and the council, we want to congratulate you and thank you. You're a great leader.
Well,
So
thank
welcome.
You. Thank you. Appreciate that.
And Joel Hewing's joining you.
Joel is joining me. So good afternoon again, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Just for the record, I'm Terry Smith and I'm the Director of the Council's Housing and Redevelopment Authority. I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Joel Hudding, who's the manager of the research unit. I also want to credit Heather Agason-Heepner, who's in our audience today. She's the Director of Finance and Administration for CD and MTS. And although she's not part of the presentation today, she helped develop these slides and was tremendously helpful in developing the budget presentation, that part of which we're sharing with you today. So our goal today is to really set the stage for future adoption of the 2020 budget, Council's 2020 budget, and to help you think through some of the very, very difficult policy decisions you will be making in the coming months that relate to the 2020 budget. So today's presentation really has two parts. Joel is going to start us out with providing some research and background on what's happening with housing and rental rates within our region and give us some historical and current perspective on that. And then I will talk about budgetary impacts of HRA issues such as setting rent limits and rent standards. So we're going to walk through this. Most of the presentation today is sort of a duplicate of what we presented last fall to the current council members at that time to adopt the 2019 budget. So what I'm hoping to help you frame is what decisions were made by your predecessors and how we got there, and then some of the choices that you will be faced with making in the next month or two.
Quick question before you start. Would you, I'm glad you pointed out that you're dividing it into two sections. Would you prefer that we wait until the end of each section to ask questions or ask questions throughout? Do you have a preference?
Madam Chair, I think we can just ask throughout. If
Okay.
it's in a future slide, we may say that's coming up in a future slide. So,
okay, good.
If that's okay with you, Joel. Okay.
Okay, great.
So we'll go that way if that works for you. And I'll turn it over to Joel.
Okay. So as Terry mentioned, my job here today is to provide you a little bit of contextual analysis of the Twin Cities rental market. And in particular, I'll be talking about the multifamily rental market. And so within that, within our data resources, we have access to about 6,400-ish properties within the region. So we have a really good sample of multifamily properties over time. And so what's not in this data set would be things, your sort of informal shadow market, as it's sometimes called. So this is going to really represent your apartments.com type apartments, things that you might see there or on Zillow or those major websites. And so this story is a story that we've told a number of times, so I don't think this is news to anyone. Hopefully there will be a few new interesting pieces here. But the basic story is that housing production has lagged population growth. That's led to, of course, an increase in demand for housing in general, and that has driven down vacancy rates within the multifamily market, and that has led to rent prices that have been growing a lot faster than inflation. And I could probably leave it there, and that would be the story that I'm about to tell. But we will break it down, as I mentioned, in some, I think, new ways. So here's that basic story again. What you're looking at, these two different lines, the line that's labeled inflation, that's looking at what rent prices would have done had they just followed inflation since the end of the Great Recession. So rent prices would have grown, but they wouldn't have grown nearly as fast as they've been growing. And so you can see in the blue line, that's the asking rent price, which you can clearly see has been increasing a lot faster than inflation in recent years. Now, the one piece of good news-ish to this story is that you can see what you're looking at here is the year-over-year percent change in average rent prices. And so if you look over to the right part of that plot, you can see that those really sharp increases that were happening between 2015 and 2017, that those, while rent prices are still growing faster than inflation, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, the rate at which they're growing has slowed a little bit, which is somewhat positive news. It's rent prices are still growing faster than inflation, but we're not seeing those 5 to 6% increases that we had been seeing a couple years back. So looking at the relationship between rent prices and vacancy rates, and why we care so much about vacancy rates, and why we're always talking about that. So you can probably pretty clearly see on this plot that as vacancy rates have come down, rent prices have gone up, and those are very highly correlated, negative relationship. We care about vacancy rates are a really nice proxy indicator for all the market interactions within the housing market. So it would be really difficult and a complex thing for us to present a bunch of data on every element of the housing market and how that's affecting rent prices. But the vacancy rate is really capturing those market interactions. And so on the demand side, you can imagine if mortgage interest rates went down, then people would be able to afford home ownership, would be cheaper. And so people would substitute out of renting and into home ownership to some extent, which would decrease the demand for rental properties, everything else constant, and that would be reflected in the vacancy rate. On the flip side, on the supply side, if you imagine that some intervention caused the cost of building housing to go up, that would result in decreased supply, which would also be reflected in the vacancy rate, which would translate to an increase in rent prices. So all these things are happening in the market at any given time, and the vacancy rate captures all those interactions. So if your question is, what is going to happen to rent prices in the future, the vacancy rate can be a really good indicator to be watching. And so you've all also heard this term healthy vacancy rate, I'm sure, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, but just to kind of talk about what that actually means, what is considered a healthy vacancy rate is a vacancy rate at which rent prices are following inflation. So you don't want a really low vacancy rate, because a really low vacancy rate means property managers, landlords, they have a lot of power, and because of that, that can result in really rapid rent price increases, which is what has been happening in recent years. On the flip side, too much vacancy is also a bad thing. So too much vacancy can make it hard for landlords and property managers to cover operating expenses, and it can ultimately result in abandoned properties. So what you want is a stable housing market, and most market analysts would consider a stable housing market one in which rent prices are following inflation. And so looking at the rental market within the Twin Cities region, what you're seeing here is the relationship between the quarterly change in inflation-adjusted rent price and vacancy rates. And so the point at $0 on this plot would essentially indicate the point at which rent prices are following inflation. So that indicates the vacancy rate where rent prices are not increasing or decreasing faster than inflation. And that's essentially what you're seeing in this plot. And we've talked about that being around 5%, and this plot kind of puts that somewhere in between 5 and 6% when you account for uncertainty in that analysis. So as you all know, vacancy rates have been substantially below that. They've been more in the 4% range in recent years, which has really been causing these rapid increases in rent. So looking at the inflation-adjusted change, and so what you would, if there was a healthy housing market over time, you would just see a flat line at 0% on this plot. But there have been times where rent prices have been growing much slower than inflation, and times where rent prices have been growing a lot faster than inflation. And so you can see a lot of interesting dynamics in this plot. If you look sort of in the early 2000s, you'll see rent prices were actually rising quite a bit slower than inflation. And in fact, they were decreasing to some extent for some of those years. And that really can be associated with the run up to the financial crisis, right? Where people, a range of different things were happening, but it was certainly there was a lot of easy access to mortgages. There was predatory lending, and all of that resulted in people substituting out of the rental market and into the home ownership market, which decreased or increased the vacancy rates and actually decreased the real price of rent during those years. And you also see that in the vacancy rate. And then, of course, the financial crisis happened. People start to substitute back into the rental market. And then, of course, we've seen a rapid population growth in recent years, and housing production has not kept up with that. And so on the right half of this, in 2015, 17, 19, we've seen these rent price increases that have been faster than inflation. And as I mentioned earlier, fortunately, that trend has seemed to stabilize to some extent, but rent prices are still growing a little bit faster than inflation. So breaking this down by a few different sub-markets, so the question has come up over the years of whether this is just due to all this luxury apartment development, and that's resulting in average rent prices that are rapidly increasing. And the answer is no. It's rent prices are increasing for every type of property. And so here you're looking at luxury apartments. Those are categorized as Class A here. Class B apartments, those are, I think a lot of people would define Class B apartments as luxury apartments as well. They're often advertised as luxury apartments. They tend to be pretty high amenity still. They're just not quite as new and fancy as the Class A property. So a really good example of a Class A property would be like, I think it's called Nick on Fifth, where it's just extremely high-end amenities. And then your Class B apartments they're still really, I think a lot of people would define them as luxury, but Class C, that's really the bread and butter of the apartment market. So when we're thinking about, anyone who's like thinking about the apartment market, they're probably thinking about a Class C apartment, which is the bulk of the housing market, or the multifamily rental housing market. And as you can see, all of these different submarkets have been increasing faster than inflation recently. Well, so it's partially true. I mean, Class A luxury apartments have risen the most percentage-wise, but you can see there's that sharp upward trajectory of the Class C apartments as well. And also, finally, I know in the last presentation that we gave on this, there was interest in seeing this broken down by different bedroom sizes. And the short story here is that rent prices are increasing for all the bedroom sizes. I wouldn't put too much into the slight differences between these different bedroom size types. My general takeaway from this would be that it's affecting all types of units. And that is what I have on the background context for what Terry is going to talk about.
Do you have Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, yeah, Joe, Mr. Hewing, I'd be interested in seeing what the statistics are for homelessness since 2010, and seeing if there are any patterns that you see as that Class C increases. I would imagine that the affordability for, a home puts, people out of a home. So it would be nice to kind of see that as well.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Hui.
Council Member, I definitely agree, and I think we know that homelessness has been rising, and in a correlated way with these trends, and we can see if we can pull together some actual numbers on that.
Yeah, that and I don't know how hard it would be, but if we could also look at the average income and if there's a correlation to, people just being priced out of the market as far as, can't afford a home anymore. So,
Absolutely, Madam Chair, and we can get that. We have that type of information
okay, thank you.
that we can readily.
Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the things that we were looking for is just the inventory of units by room size. I think one of the questions and the perceptions is that we don't have enough or 3-bedroom units for larger families. And so I think that's one of the questions that I know Council Member Mousse has asked about several times, is just trying to understand that with a lot of our growing populations, the value of multi-families living in the same space, or just having also larger family sizes in general, and not having enough inventory of housing that has 3 or more bedrooms available in rental contexts, is one of the things that I think he's trying to understand, and I see why that's valuable for us to look at. But this is really helpful to see too. It's not surprising to me, having a sister who is single, and that studios seem to be one of the most expensive things you can get, where a lot of times people are thinking, oh, just get a studio, but they tend to be more often in the fancier buildings and are not that much cheaper than multi-bedroom spaces. So it's concerning. That's been the affordable housing for people, is to find a studio, but that's not affordable at all here.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That was where my questioning was going as well. The breakdown, just from my 20 plus years on the City Council in Plymouth, we always knew that for families in great need, or need in general, to get those 3-bedroom apartments, 3+ bedroom, were so hard, and the subsidies to get them built were just incredibly hard, because there's cost per square foot to build, and then the price per square foot, which factors into why those studios are so expensive. They might be cheaper, but per square foot, they're much higher to rent. So I'm just interested at some point too. We would try to keep track of that, certainly at the city level, but just regionally. And, I don't even know if we, have the ability, but as we put funds out there, and we can break down some of where the greatest need is how can we potentially direct funds or partner with developers, and maybe that's already happening through the funds we have in LUAC, or the committees that review all of our programs. But again, just interested in seeing where we can direct funds where there is a great need. And then especially as comp plans are coming through, there are communities that are identifying the redevelopment or future development that has the potential for densities. And as a city council member, and mayor, I would always caution people too, because you guide and zone something for higher densities does not necessarily mean it will be affordable. It doesn't guarantee affordability at all, because you can have high density, extremely expensive apartments. So as we're trying to impact with the scarce funds that we do have, I just want to understand how we direct them. And that's not an immediate question, it's just a philosophy I bring to what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Johnson, certainly as we move into later this fall and fourth quarter, we will be initiating conversations with you as a council on how you'd like to influence the Livable Communities Act programs and where your priorities are. And we will be bringing to how past administrations have done that within the parameters set out in legislation, but that gets into items like how we score different types of projects and that type of work. And I know we've shared that. Paul Burns has shared with you scoring rubrics in the past too. So just kind of know that that's out there, and there are opportunities for that because we do that on an annual fund distribution plan. But certainly, bedroom size is something that we, as we're looking at proposed projects, are things that we're looking at is adding. Both additional opportunities, but also diversifying existing neighborhoods by adding different housing types within them as well. Thank you.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In my day job hat, I've recently only been learning about opportunity zones, and so in my community hat, I'm wondering about how that impacts our various communities and what that might mean for positive development and or gentrification. And so I was wondering if it's a federal thing and there's a lifetime to it, like 10 years or whatever. But I'm interested. I think as regional policymakers, it would behoove us to learn more about opportunity zones and what they mean for us, for our region, and for the issues around affordable housing. And I wonder if there's some way we can study or track how opportunity zones and projects funded by those funds impact affordable housing. And I don't know if that kind of information is public or proprietary because I know, it's all sorts of complex investments involved. But I think that, so that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you. Mr. Hooting, I tend to get my really good questions at about 3 a.m. following the committee meeting. And I promise not to ever start calling people about it at that time. But recently, sometime I would guess maybe it was in July, I read an article about a community in southern Minnesota that was doing some redevelopment, and they were eliminating a lot of their affordable housing. And as I was reading the article, my immediate question was, what's the impact for the Twin Cities in terms of the potential that people might be moving from that community up here or to other regional centers, perhaps Mankato or Rochester? What additional pressure does that put on our housing market? Is there any way of researching and assessing, in the spirit of the One Minnesota agenda that the governor has, kind of how housing and rental and development projects impact each other from the various corners of the state? Have you done any work in that area, or are you aware of any resources to help us kind of dig into that? And did I make any sense?
No, it does make sense to me. We haven't done that type of analysis, but yeah, the Twin Cities is a region that's situated in a state, that's situated in a country. And thinking about that sort of holistic perspective makes a lot of sense. It's certainly something that I will reflect on.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer today,
Okay,
but I think that's a good comment.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
And just to add on to that, and I am not a researcher. You are the smart person, so I know enough to be dangerous. But in my day job, our MSA, the Metropolitan Statistical Area, is 13 Minnesota counties, 15 if you count the 2 in Wisconsin, because 25% or more of the workforce is driving into the core. So you certainly know that those people are already driving into the core, whatever core means. And so housing and transportation are very closely aligned outside of the 7 counties that we're responsible for. So that's the stuff I'm also looking for in my day job, wondering how it all fits together. Just a comment.
Yeah.
Another way, the federal government is measuring us in just a little bit bigger area.
So are we ready to move on to the budget? Got it. Ms. Smith.
Okay, so what Joel has just talked about and the rising rents certainly has an impact on the HRA and the HRA budget. Our business relies on rents and what's happening in the market, and so as rents increase, the costs in the housing authority also increase. So I want to have some conversation about payment standards, and this is where you will have some really tough decisions in the next month or so around this. But the housing authority and the council, you all as policymakers have discretion on where we set these payment standards is the formal name, but they're really rent limits that families with vouchers use when they're out shopping for a rental unit. So their amount, an amount needed to rent a modest housing unit, so more like Class C properties. The subsidy is not meant to assist people in luxury properties, but it's a modest rental unit. And what I mean by that is when HUD sets the fair market rents, they're looking at the lower 40% of the market, not the upper 60%. And that's how HUD sets fair market rents for our agency. But these payment standards and rent limits are limited by fair market rents that are issued by HUD. They're effective in October each year. And then once they're issued by HUD, the council has discretion to adopt these rent limits between 90% and 110% of those fair market rents. So we are somewhat limited, but we do have the discretion that is supposed to allow for local market conditions. So again, this is a last year slide. So last year, October 1st, 2018, the fair market rents increased by 5.6 to 6.8%. And I have all those exclamation points there because in my 20-some years doing this work, I've never seen fair market rents increase that much. And I think what has happened is they're relying on American Community Survey data that's a few years old. And so as Joel talked about the rents in our area, here's inflation, our rents are essentially skyrocketing. Those fair market rent percentage increases last year were the fair market rent's trying to catch up with what our market is actually doing here. And I think it's still lagging some. And then the federal requirement again allows you all with recommendations from staff to adopt rent limits and payment standards between 90% and 110% of fair market rents. New fair market rents just came out late Friday, and so I'm not prepared to talk about those today other than to tell you that the increases were about the same. They increased from between 5.3 and 7% again this year. And the difference is they set the fair market rents by bedroom size. So different bedroom sizes have different percent increase. But so that's 2 years in a row where these fair market rents have substantially increased. That will have significant budget implications. That's the word I'm looking for us all. So I'm going to try in the next couple of slides help you understand what that means. So when these fair market rents increase, we purchase annual rent data from a few different sources, and what we do is dig into that and look at average rents by bedroom size by community in our service jurisdiction. And we look at what current rents are in those communities, average rents, where the fair market rents are, and where our current payment standards or rent limits are. And we're looking at all those things to try and make a reasonable recommendation to you all in terms of what we want these rent limits to be for our families. And I'm going to dig into that in a couple slides to show you some examples of how that actually works. We also have working with Joel and his research team to dig into some new CoStar data to help us really look deeply at these rents and what's happening. We also look at the percentage of rent burden by our current assisted families. And what we mean by rent burden is families that are paying above 30% of their income towards rent or above 40% of their income towards rent. And I'll illustrate what that means in a couple of slides. But as those go up and up and up, you know, for example, last year when we looked at payment standards, 55% of our families living in 2-bedroom units were rent burdened, and that's a problem for us. So that's telling us that our rent limits were too low and we needed to increase rent limits for 2 bedrooms because that's a high percentage of rent burden. And I'll share sort of what that means. But your role, the council's role in this is to set the rent limits, as I've indicated. And past council practice has really been to balance having rent limits high enough to ensure that families can be successful in using their vouchers, but low enough to serve as many families as possible, because the higher the rent limits, the lower number of families you can serve. So we want to have a reasonable balance in that to maximize service to families, but also ensure that families can be successful finding a unit with their voucher. Generally speaking, tenants pay between 30 and 40% of their income towards rent. So, for example, if a family rents a unit within the payment standard, so say for a 2-bedroom they rent, actually I'm going to show you in a couple slides what that means. But if they rent a unit within the payment standard, they pay 30% of their income towards rent. If they rent a unit that's above that payment standard or rent limit, they pay 30% plus the difference, and they can pay up to 40% of their income towards rent when they move in. So all this to say that the maximum rent for each family is based on income and based on these rent limit payment standards, and I'll show you how we, hopefully a simplified version of how that works. This is a slide of who we're serving, and this is again 2018 data. These numbers have changed a little bit, and when I come back for new discussion on payment standards, I'll update this. But our average household size is 2.9 members. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, we do have data on household size and how that has changed over the years, so I'm happy to bring some of that back for you all. Our average household income last year was 16%. It's now about 16,000. It's now about 18,000 for each family. Our average tenant rent payment, $390 last year. Average HRA payment is $740 last year. And then the families with children are 53%. The remaining are single individuals, either just regular single individuals, persons with disabilities, or elderly persons. So here's an example to illustrate how payment standards work. So let's say family X is going to rent a 2-bedroom apartment. The rent on this 2-bedroom apartment is $1,025 a month. They pay electricity. As a result, they get a $57 credit on their rent, and you will also adopt utility allowance schedules later this fall. But I'm not going to get into that today. We don't have a whole lot of discretion because it's based on utility consumption and rate data, and we'll be bringing that to you in a month or so. But the gross rent on this unit, so meaning the cost for rent and utilities, is $1,082. The 2-bedroom payment standard is $1,090. So as you can see, that total rent falls within the payment standard. So this unit is approvable for the family, and this family will pay 30% of their income towards rent and utilities. Another example, let's say this a 2-bedroom apartment is $1,050, resulting in a gross rent or total rent and utilities of $1,107. The payment standard stays the same, right, at $1,090. So this means the gross rent is $17 over the payment standard. So in this example, this family will pay 30% of their income plus the extra $17. So in that amount, that $17 amount, can go only up so far because families are limited, and this is a federal rule, to paying a maximum of 40% of their income when they move into a unit. And so, again, the max is different for each family. But this is a very simplified 2 examples to show you how these payment standards work. The important piece on this slide are really the arrows. The federal government, or HUD, provides us with annual budget authority and then says go out and serve as many families as you can up to your baseline vouchers. Last year our baseline was 6,616 vouchers. We now have 6,697, so almost 6,700 vouchers, so it's gone up a little bit. But HUD says, here's your money, now go out and serve as many families as you can. And the number of families we can serve are based on these rent limits. So if we adopt higher rent limits, that means we have a higher average subsidy per family. Of course, that means fewer vouchers issued or fewer families served. Vouchers success rates increase because families are able to find units within those rent limits. And then it builds future year funding because current year spending predicts future year funding. So if we spend more, we get more. Conversely, if we have lower rent limits, that means we have lower average subsidy. It means we can potentially serve more families, so the money goes further. Lower success rates. So if we adopt rent limits that are too low, then families have trouble finding a unit that will work with their voucher, and that becomes problematic. And then it risks future year funding. So if we spend less, we get less in future years. So payment standard considerations that were presented to your predecessors last fall. As we've talked, the fair market rents increased last year by 6+%. That's a significant increase, which has significant budget impacts. Currently, we have two sets of payment standards. So we have what's called, and we have federal discretion to adopt different levels of payment standards, but we have what we call our regular standards that cover most of Metro HRA's 96 community service area. And then we have what's called exception standards, and these cover 13 of our higher rent communities. It costs something different to rent a unit in, for example, Columbia Heights than it costs to rent a unit in Minnetonka. So these standards are really providing choice, opening up more choice for families in terms of where they want to live. That also has budgetary impacts that I'll talk about in a couple of slides. These payment standards and the rent markets, as they've been adopted, support Thrive Will statements in terms of offering housing options for people in all life stages and developing tools, including competitive rent limits and higher cost communities to enable housing choice voucher holders choice in terms of where they want to live. So we presented 3 scenarios to the council members last fall to arrive at our current payment standards. One of them was to leave rent limits right where they were. One was to increase them some, and one was to increase them more. So I'll just go briefly through each one of those to help you see how they arrived where they arrived. So scenario 1 was to leave the rent standards in place from the previous year. So don't do any increases at all. But on the pro side, we would have the ability to issue all of our vouchers. So we wouldn't have any problem serving all 6,600 families with the money. There would be less program deficit than the other scenarios, so we wouldn't be operating at a budget deficit. On the con side, there are lots of cons with this option that were presented, but voucher use becomes difficult. So finding a rental unit in a rental market where rents are rising becomes very difficult for families under scenario 1. Rent burden would be increasing for existing families. So we had some families were paying as much as 50% of their income towards rent. I think I indicated earlier we had 55% of our families in 2 bedrooms paying more than 30% of their income towards rent. And we know as the year went on, those numbers would increase. It would limit housing choice to low rent communities. So renting unit in some of the higher rent communities would be off the table for voucher holders, and then potentially risks future funding. So we spend less, we get less. Scenario 2 that was limited was to do a limited increase for all bedroom sizes. And so it was a modest increase to all bedroom sizes, and it would increase voucher placement some because we didn't be increasing the rent limits for all bedroom sizes, improve housing choice in all neighborhoods, reduce rent burden for existing families, and increase federal revenues for 2020. The cons would be results in a program structural deficit, would reduce the vouchers issued, so we would not be able to serve all 6,600 families within our federal funding. But our staff recommendation at the time was that the rent limits still would not be high enough for some bedroom sizes for families to be successful in finding a unit that meets their needs. And then the third scenario was we called a targeted increase. So it would be increase in payment standards by bedroom size based on market conditions. So really digging into those average rents by community and proposing rents that could be workable for voucher families. So lower increases in some bedroom sizes and higher increases in some. More so reflected market conditions, increases more than any other option, voucher placement success, improves choice in all neighborhoods, reduces rent burden, and then increases federal funding in future years. And then the cons is that it results in the largest program deficit. So the federal money, there needs to be other funds to supplement the federal funding or reduce the number of families that we serve. And the previous council landed on scenario 3. So the rent limits were adopted based on market conditions. We called it targeted increase. So the percentages were higher for some bedroom sizes, lower for others, and that was really based on average rents by community. And so that's where the previous council landed. We presented as this a long-term problem. This is a problem as long as the market remains where it's at. So unless the rental market turns around, and we had a glimpse of hope from Joel that maybe the rental market is starting to stabilize off, we really need the rental market to stabilize off in order to resolve this issue with our voucher holders. And so that would be good news. The other thing is the federal funding formula would need to change. Not sure what the likelihood of that happening in the next 3 months. It won't be happening. And so we really need that market to level off. But the implementations to the budget impacts other areas of the council, right? If the council is going to dedicate funding to serve voucher holders, there are impacts in other areas. So not subsidizing with other funds, and in this case it was HRA reserves, impacts low-income families in the region, could potentially increase homelessness if vouchers can't find units with their voucher. What happens? Could indirectly increase homelessness. There could be impact on areas of concentrated poverty. So if the only units available to voucher holders are those in impacted areas of the region or lower rent areas of the region, that could be impacted. Council investment in other initiatives is a consideration. Council commitment in the Thrive Will statements, and then also future year federal funding levels. So the 2019 budget summary, so the council had the choices on the left, the rent limits, the vouchers, reducing vouchers through attrition, subsidizing the program with other council funds, reducing cost through reduced community choice. And what we mean by that is we talked about these exception rent standards in the higher rent areas of the region. That costs about $1 million a year to have those higher rent limits in those higher rent areas. So that's what we mean by either potentially reducing community choice, and then trying to secure alternative funding sources. On the right side, the council actions that were taken last fall were to adopt the targeted increase in rent limits, as I talked about, to issue all vouchers. So that council wanted us to use other money to serve all of our voucher holders, to lease to all possible voucher holders. Maintain community choice, so continue to provide those exception rent limits, and then targeted increase to the rent limits. So those are the things that they approved. Since then, we have learned another piece of information. So at that time, that the current budget that was approved included $2 million in general purpose levy funds to support the issuance of all vouchers in the Housing Authority. Although we've been talking with our HUD partners since early in the year, March or so, about that, we just recently learned about 3 weeks ago that we cannot use state or local money to fund vouchers. So the only pot of money we have available to serve all voucher holders is what we refer to as Section 8 reserves, or housing choice voucher money. We do have some of that, and we'll be talking to you further about what that means and what that looks like in future budget consideration. So that option, we've had some council members express concern in previous presentations about using general purpose levy funds to serve, to fund vouchers. Let me back up. The general purpose levy funds are generated from taxes from the entire region. The council's housing authority only serves part of the region, so there have been some concerns expressed last fall from council members Wolf and Barber, and then again this year around with those two council members, along with council member Johnson and a few others, about that. And so I'm here to say that that option is off the table, so that concern can no longer be a concern. We still have the issue with the federal funding not being enough to serve all families.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. I'm curious about, Ms. Smith, the background on why no state or local funding for vouchers.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, there was a federal notice that was issued back in 2013 during sequestration. So that limited housing authorities from using other funds to subsidize families, because what happens is if we spend in the council, with council approval, the housing authority spent Section 8 reserves in 2017 and 2018 to serve more families, and then we in turn got that money back from the federal budget the following year, and HUD didn't want that to happen. So that notice was from way back in 2013. We thought it was applicable to the sequestration year. HUD's saying it's still applicable. So, so that was the intent of that notice, that 6-year-old notice.
Councilmember Johnson.
Is there a reach back on that? I mean, we've already.
Could you repeat your question?
Madam Chair, is there a reach back on that? Because we've already allocated that funding, which was interpreted to not meet the federal guideline or rule or whatever it was.
Chair Vento and Councilmember Johnson, no. We have been working with federal partners for the last month, and our some of the council members, we've had some discussions about where to go with this issue. There's an opportunity that we can get some additional HUD funding, which we are pursuing for this current year to serve more families, but not all of our families. And so we are going down that route to not potentially, we're confident we're going to get another $1 million from HUD this year if we work with what they call their shortfall team. And shortfall sounds like we're going to be in HUD jail or finance jail or something, and that's not the case. It's just the term that they know we don't have enough money without using that general purpose fund to serve the all currently housed families. And so if we will be participating in these shortfall calls, as they call them, every other week, and we have our first one on Thursday, and then at the end of the year they will make us whole, which will be about $1 million. It might be $1.2 million, but they will make us whole so we can continue serving all voucher holders.
Just to clarify, will that be one time only or a permanent or nothing's permanent with the federal government, but an increase in the base?
Yes, Chair Vento, that will be an increase in the base, so we will get that money back in 2020 in our budget.
Okay. Yes.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Ms. Augustin Hubner.
Follow up one item. We have not spent any local or state funding on the program yet. So there would, even if there was a reach back project, we have spent nothing but federal money. Council money was always going to be the last money in. So while we brought the money in to make sure we met our targets for council policy, we've not spent any local money. So we have not violated any federal rule, any federal statute or state statute. We are all in the green, other than it limits our exception or limits our options.
Ms. Cummings or Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Chair. I'm curious a little bit, can you fill in a little bit about the deficit and when it started and how it has increased or not? I know that it's been propped up, but looking forward, I mean, this is not a situation that we want to revisit year after year or watch grow. And I realize that there's some positive signs, but it'll be a little while before we actually reap the benefits of that, if in fact that's permanent. But can you give a little more history on that?
I will, Madam Chair and Councilmember Cummings. This slide touches on that. So some of the things since last fall that staff have been working on is We received a legal opinion on levy authority, so the council does not have specific levy authority specific to the HRA. State statute allows the council to spend general purpose levy on HRA activities, although we now know we have this new federal information. We looked at, talked with other housing authorities around the country and here in our region to find out what are other housing authorities doing to solve this problem. Some housing authorities have low rent limits, so they're able to serve all families. I won't mention any housing authority specific today, but happy to talk one-on-one with you if you want to. But if adopting lower rent limits allows some housing authorities to serve all their families, so they limit really choice on where families can live. Reductions in program size, so just managing their program to the budget. Here's what our budget is, here's how many families we can serve within that budget, and that's what we will do. And then use of reserves. So some housing authorities, including the council's HRA, have some of these Section 8 reserves that are an eligible uses to fund more vouchers, but those are running out. It's not a sustainable solution. I will say that this is somewhat of a new problem for the council. So we've been administering this program 40 plus years. We've always been able to serve all of our voucher holders with the federal budget authority that's awarded, with the exception of a few anomaly years. Sequestration was one of them. We had some budget issues in 2009, but historically we've been able to serve all voucher holders with the exception of 2017 and 2018. And in those years, we used Section 8 reserves to serve all families. And those are now running out because once you start paying subsidy, those funds dwindle. So when I say we need the market to even out for this problem to go away, I mean that because we did it for years and years and years. So if the market level's off, we could potentially serve all of our families again, but we're not there yet. So that's why I say the 2020 budget discussion will be a tough one for you all, and really the rent limits plays the biggest part in that budget discussion.
Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Did the just one thing to point out, and I apologize if someone else mentioned this, but if you use these slides again, I think there's a typo on the previous slide where it says targeted increases twice in the council's action, unless you meant it twice.
No, thank you.
And the one that piece around securing alternative funding and the other communities, how that works, we haven't gotten to the point where we really have had conversations past what are we doing, or are we going to look into that, and that's really been it. But what's the reality or the potential for that?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, that option is pretty much off the table because we can't use those funds to fund vouchers anyways. We can only use Section 8 reserves to fund vouchers. What we can do is use general purpose levy to fund, for example, non-federal activities that we have. So for staffing costs for staff that are working on non-federal programs, for example, but it's that option is off the table due to this federal rule.
Yes, Ms. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
I don't have the knowledge of this, but because this is something that Councilmember Wolf and Barber have brought up that there are other communities who, I don't know what I'm talking about. Do you know what I'm talking about? That pay, sorry,
Fill their gaps.
that fill the gaps that we aren't supporting in this way. How does that work for them? How are those gaps being filled? And why can't we do that?
Ms. Smith.
Or facilitate that?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, are you talking about how other housing authorities fill these gaps?
If I recall correctly, I didn't bring my right notebooks with me today. I apologize. That I believe was that the city of Minneapolis fills gaps in with additional funds that they put into their program. how are other people dealing? We're not the only ones dealing with this issue. So how are other places dealing with it, and can we not? Or are they just, they're doing the same thing we're doing?
Ms. Smith?
So, Madam Chair and Council Member, so we know other housing authorities are using other funds to fill the gap, and are not aware of this notice as well, number one. Number two, Minneapolis, they have what's called moving to work status, so they can make up their own rules, so they can use different funds than we can use because they have this moving to work status that provides them with flexibility. St. Paul, for example, they are able to serve all of their families within the current, within their federal funding because they have lower rent limits for their city. So there's a combination of things. But the reality is there are housing authorities all across the country that are filling gaps in ways that they maybe shouldn't be, but that's not for us. I would say that's not for us. That's for HUD to figure out with these other agencies. We know we can't do that, and we haven't, and now we won't.
Oh, boy. Ms. Cummings, and then I'll come back.
Thank you. I'm going to throw two questions out there, unrelated, but as long as I have the floor for a second. Are we looking at the moving to work status? And can you give us an update on that? My second question is, what is our role in encouraging rental agencies, rental owners to accept Section 8 vouchers? Because clearly now the pool is shrinking because they don't have to. So anyway, those are my two questions right now.
Ms. Smith?
So, Madam Chair and Councilmember Cummings, I'll answer the rent landlord engagement question. So we have a staff that is out pounding the pavement every single day looking for landlords, our outreach staff, and talking with landlords and partners and management companies about participating in the voucher program. So locally, we're doing that all the time. There's an initiative through Housing Link and Family Housing Fund to make a broader impact on those discussions with private landlords to encourage acceptance of Section 8 vouchers. There was recently a landlord summit with the Homeless Veterans Administration, a summit to encourage participation of landlords. We have landlord briefings. We have a landlord workshop coming up. We're going to be at the Minnesota Multi-Housing Fall Convention, which they have a membership of 400 private landlords and management companies that attend this convention. So we have a table there where we will be reaching out to landlords. So I would say we are doing more than we've ever done in my 20 years here in terms of landlord engagement, but it's a choice. And so landlords still have the ability to choose whether they want to accept the voucher holder or not.
I think I had heard, excuse me, Madam Chair, at one time, I don't know if it's true or not, but that some of the requirements were pretty burdensome. And is there a look at some of the requirements and easing some of those restrictions? And I don't know, I don't know if this is true or not. It's just anecdotal, but that payments were delayed or took a lot of time or whatever. And so those were some challenges too on how we accept people into the program.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Cummings, yes. Those are all realities for landlords. The things we hear over and over are inspections, payments, and I think the payments issue is unique to some housing authorities and not others. But we have ongoing landlord focus groups where we gain feedback on these things, and our staff we've worked on our process so we can turn around a payment in a landlord. We can do a lease up in a 2 weeks period of time. It takes 2 months at some housing authorities. So I think we have received positive feedback from the most part from landlords on this initiative. Inspections are one of the things that landlords don't necessarily like. And so we've been working with our landlords. How can we make our process easier? How can we make it more user friendly? And so we've really been trying to standardize our practice with all of our inspectors, but moving to biennial inspections is one of the things that landlords would like to see, and that's going to be one of our recommendations when we come back to you later this month for the Public Housing Agency Plan proposal. But it's definitely a reality. When a landlord can rent to person X over here, get more rent and not have to deal with any of, the um, inconveniences, where we would say we've developed a marketing piece, and I'm happy to share it with you all. That's easy steps to the housing choice voucher program, because it's really quite simple. And so we've been really trying to get that message in front of landlords to help them understand how simple it really is. So.
Thank you.
Ms. Chambliss?
I had the second question.
I'm sorry.
Moving into working.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So Chair Vento and Councilmember Cummings, on the moving to work front, as you may recall, we have two paths we're taking to try and get moving to work status for the council's housing authority. One is in partnership with Minneapolis Public Housing Authority. So there's language in the 2016 Appropriations Act law that allows HUD to award, extend a moving to work agency's status to adjacent housing authorities, which would be us. It's never been done anywhere in the country. There are no real rules on how that would happen, so we've been working with HUD to try and figure out how we can make that work, to make it a doable solution for us and a doable solution for Minneapolis. We had a conference call with HUD National last week with their moving to work office, along with council attorneys and MPHA and their attorneys, to try and iron out some of the details. The Appropriations Act contains language about who operates the vouchers, and so we're trying to work through some of that, because if the reality is that we need to give our vouchers to Minneapolis to have them operate them to make this work, I would say that's a deal breaker. If we can work out some cooperation agreements of some sort to have that be the case on paper, but the administering authority is really with the council, because our intention with this is to maintain separate governing boards, separate operating procedures, separate budgeting, reporting. It's just an effort to serve families better. And so we are getting together with Minneapolis to talk through some of this in the coming weeks, and then we will have another conversation with our federal partners. The second way we've looked at getting moving to work status is through this moving to work expansion under rent reform. So under that notice, we've submitted our letter of interest to HUD back in, oh boy, what month are we in? April. I think it was April. And so we submitted a letter of interest on that. You may have seen a board resolution at your council meeting last week where we were missing 4 words in our board resolution. So we added those back in, resent it to HUD, and I would imagine we will know within the next month or so whether we will be invited to submit a full application. I think under both scenarios, the takeaway message is there are lots of unknowns. I think it would be a good thing for the council's HRA to have this moving to work status, but bottom line is it has to work for you all, for us, and for the families that we serve. And so there's a lot of unknowns that we're still working through, but we're still pursuing both options.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Chambliss.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ms. Smith. I'm curious about, since we factor in income for our standard rent, income and expenses also impact your ability to pay your rent and to take care of your family.
Yeah.
How are we supporting renters in terms of resources to, reduce their childcare expenses, reduce their utilities, reduce their food? I know that, some people may be getting food stamps and the Fed might be cutting food stamps, but I know when I was working part-time as a single parent, it made a huge difference to have WIC for, some of my cereal and milk and things like that. How does that factor in with the equation? Because, some people think, well, we have to segment everything. If only housing. But for a person who's trying to balance their budget, it's more than just the housing. It's the income. It's your expenses as well.
Yeah. Madam Chair, were you going to say something, Lisa? Oh, okay, sorry. Madam Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, we call that agency time, where families are going from agency to agency to agency, filling out same paperwork or similar paperwork, and then starting over. And what an exhausting process that is. That's for another day. But some of the supports that we're providing, and we're not able to provide to all voucher holders because we don't have the staff time to do so. But for example, with our community choice program and with some of our specialized vouchers like the mainstream vouchers that were awarded to persons experiencing homelessness and sleeping on the train, we provide some additional supports like that, like goal setting and working on self-sufficiency activities, maximizing income. If someone's eligible for Social Security, we have connections that can help them get those resources. I will say those are very time-consuming supports that we do not have the staff time to provide for a broader housing choice voucher population. Would we like to provide those? Absolutely. I would say we're more providing those ongoing supports to the council residents that live in the council-owned units and some of these special purpose vouchers. But for the broader voucher population, I would say that's more on a case-by-case. We're working with hard to house families with our outreach team in some cases, and that reaches the broader voucher population. So as our outreach team is doing some housing search, they might do some of that light touch service piece, but you know, it comes down to time and having the time to do those supports that are important.
Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
I'm good. My question was
Okay.
answered.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of things too. So do we have any site-based vouchers through our Metro HRA? And are those in addition to the vouchers that we're speaking about that are portable, that stay with the person, or are they included in that 6,600 number? So,
Madam Chair and Councilmember Johnson, we have 6,697 vouchers. Most are attached to a tenant, but some are project-based. We have 810 that are attached to units within buildings. 150 of those are the council-owned units that I'm going to talk about next.
and then as far as the veterans vouchers, I know we've got certain vouchers that we've reserved only for veterans. Are those being utilized right now, or do we have some that are still kind of sitting on the shelf waiting?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Johnson, we have 157 veteran vouchers, and those are awarded separately from HUD. In fact, we just applied for some more last week. And we have, they're not fully utilized. We have about 30 veterans that are right now shopping for units, and they have case managers through the Veterans Administration that are helping them place those vouchers. And the difficulty has been finding landlords who will take veterans with high barriers. And the ones that are out shopping are typically the ones that have high barriers, things on their background that wouldn't pass standard selection criteria. This landlord summit that happened about 3 weeks, maybe a month ago, was helpful. And we're getting more interest from landlords, but it comes down to unit availability.
Madam Chair, just a couple more things. And is there a way to, I don't even know if this is possible, but you know, creativity in this world, right? So, but we've gone into the regular vouchers to see if veterans are in there. Can we swap out veterans who might be in the, you know, regular housing choice vouchers and get them a veterans voucher to free up then a voucher for a non-veteran?
Smith.
It's a good thought. Haven't thought about that. Something we can look into. I mean, I think we could do some of that swapping. I'd have to think through the logistics and how that would work, but it's a good thought that I'm happy to take back and think through with my team.
That'd be great. And then, you know, again, the One Minnesota and trying to end veterans homelessness here in the immediate future. So anything that we can do, but then also trying to relieve pressure on the other vouchers. And then also, I really understand trying to relieve some of the burdens on the landlords that we're trying to keep and entice into taking the vouchers. But I also really know that inspections are important. So you know, there's pros and cons to that too. But I also know that in the city of Plymouth with our HRA, rental properties have to have licensure, and with that comes inspections already. So this would not, we couldn't do anything differently and overrule a local city's rental licensure program, because I'm making the assumption that those properties already have to get the rental license from the city. And so the who has priority? I would assume the city would have jurisdiction and priority.
Ms. Smith?
So, Madam Chair and Councilmember Johnson, there are separate requirements. So the federal regulations require that we determine whether a unit meets specific housing quality standards, and there are certain standards. There are, we have 96 communities where we operate the program. Some have rental licensing requirements, some don't. Some do it every year, some do it 3 years, some do it 5 years, so they're all over the place. And we have cities who want us to not serve a family in a unit that doesn't have a rental license. And I think that is a valid request from cities, but managing 7,000 rental units and figuring out whether they have a valid rental license, it's just not possible for us to be monitoring that. So there is a new HUD rule that allows us to use alternative inspection. If a public entity recently inspected a unit like a tax credit inspection, for example, we could take that inspection and not conduct a new one. But this is one of those areas where we're sort of trying to do baby steps, move to some biennial inspections, and then see if we want to entertain some of these other flexibilities that have been offered through inspections. Whether we could use a city rental licensing inspection, my initial thought is that we can't because they're looking at different things. But I'd have to look at the exact rules. I wonder if Jennifer knows the answer to that.
And Madam Chair, my intent would be that I think most communities understand the pressure, and if there's a way that we can help synchronize maybe what some of those local communities are doing through their rental licensing and sync it up with what we might need, so that again it might reduce the burden to the landlord and a one and done, and they're good to go, whether it be just for rental licensing or through the section or housing choice voucher program. And I do appreciate wanting flexibility where we can't be the licensing police out there for people that are using our vouchers, potentially going into a non-licensed apartment or home. But I would also say licensing is really the way a local authority has some teeth to ensure that those landlords are doing right by their renters. And in a housing market like we're in right now, man, you would think that they would be pouring money into their units because they've got so much. And that's just not the case in many situations. In my community, I would say where I live, the apartments are nice, class C, B, and a few A's are showing up. But I would also say I was really disappointed when I looked at, some of the deficiencies. They're still passing, but so I guess I'm just trying to say there's that fine line where you don't want to make it so hard that people can't even get housing, but at the same time, you don't want them to find themselves into a situation where they're kind of trapped into something that they're afraid to make a complaint. They're afraid to ask for what they deserve. And so that's why I'm hoping, and I know it's complicated because every city has their own set of rules or no rules at all, but as we move together in some of these, it'd be great to synchronize to the best of our ability so that cities help us in our endeavors to get people in to units. I think that's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Ms. Smith?
Okay, moving on. So just upcoming discussions. Again, you'll hear about these rent limits in the next month. We just got them, so now we need to work with Joel and his team, and we'll do data analysis on that. And we will come back for an information item on these rent limits first, and then a month later, we'll come back for action on those payment standards. So we'll set up some scenarios like you saw today. And we'll work through some of that, have some discussion. part of this will be, we'll have a minimum rent discussion, and that's budgetary in the fact that it minimally impacts our budget, but I think, this is, this isn't a one size fits all, one solution. I think it's going to take several different creative solutions to come up with a solution that will allow us to serve all families. So the minimum rent discussion will come up again as part of our future conversations.
Ms. Johnson.
And just briefly on that, could you, or do you have just a quick survey of, I think I was just Googled City of Minneapolis, I think I read they have a $75 minimum rent. I don't even know if Plymouth what it is. So is there a way we could just kind of see what in the landscape across the region, what people are doing?
Councilmember Chair Vento, Councilmember Johnson, yes, we've done that. So 8 out of the 10 have minimum rent policies. 2 do not have minimum rent. And Jennifer probably has it right here. She's the one that did the analysis.
If I may.
Yes, Ms. Keel.
To answer your question about Plymouth and Richfield are the 2 housing authorities in Twin Cities that don't have a minimum rent. St. Paul is at 50, Dakota County CDA is at 50. I would say all but Minneapolis are at 50 that have them because Minneapolis is moving to work, and so they have flexibility in what they set.
Thank you.
So then here's the calendar. As you see things in October, in October you'll see the capital budget presentation. You'll be adopting a public comment draft budget. In December, you'll be adopting final budget levies. Ignore that 11 that snuck up on us. We don't. It's just pretend it's not there. It's a typo.
What 11?
Exactly, right? So that's council action before you, and this committee will be a capital budget presentation in October. Again, we'll have rent limit standards information item, and then October and November we'll have rent limits action item, and then also utility allowances along with that. And with that, any more questions, I'm happy to answer.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Chair. It's not really a question, it's just a comment. And, as difficult as the decisions are and what we face. So I live across the street from an elementary school, and yesterday a van pulled in, and the end of the parking lot is adjacent to the street that I live on, and there are only 2 houses on our street, so it's pretty private. And this spot is particularly private, and this van was there. Every door was open, the rear hatch was open. There were 2 kids, probably 3 and 5, and the parents, and they literally had taken every single item that was in that van, and it was laid out all around in the grassy area nearby, and the kids were playing, and I was looking at them. I thought perhaps they had car trouble and they needed to empty the vehicle so they could jack it up and fix a tire, whatever. And I looked a couple hours later, and it was still there, and there was all this activity going on, and they were clearing out lots of, pizza boxes and McDonald's bags and things like that. And the kids were playing, they'd go over in the schoolyard and play a little bit, and then they'd come back. And I went back 6 hours later. I looked, and they were still there in the parking lot, and they were still doing all of this movement and everything. And finally at 8 o'clock, my husband and I walked over. Clearly, this was their home. And so we walked over and asked if they were all right, and they said, yep, we're just cleaning some things out. And we asked if we could do anything or if they needed anything, and they said, no, thank you, that's right. And they were very polite and very, you can't impose yourself, but one wondered, with all of the stuff that they had taken out of this van, that was clearly every possession that they had, was all these big plastic bags filled with goods that they owned and bags of clothing. And, the kids were pretty oblivious because they're kids, and they should be, and they were just playing and having this grand time. But it made you wonder how there could even be room for 4 people within that van when they put everything back inside, and which they ultimately did. And, we said, it's going to rain because they had things everywhere. And he said, yep, we'll be done cleaning. But anyway, and then I sat on the porch where I could watch them, and the kids had their flashlights and they were playing, and the parents were doing all this configuring and reconfiguring and trying to feed the kids. And it occurred to me, I mean, it just knowing what we were going to be talking about today and so forth, and I thought, what if they were one of the 200 families that we couldn't provide a voucher for, or somebody that we had to say, well, we can get you a voucher, but there isn't any place. I mean, just the reality of that right in front of my face with this family, that this was clearly what was happening, was heartbreaking. It was absolutely heartbreaking. And the decisions, of course, are going to be challenging, and there aren't any easy answers, and somebody's going to lose. And it's really unfortunate and very sad. And I've said it before, this is the United States of America. And I don't mean this about the Metro HRA, but I just mean in general, that this is an issue, that people don't have a safe place to live and to lay their heads down, and for children to have that stability for schooling and everything else is really hard to swallow. So I thank you for all of your work in trying to figure out the best way that we can configure everything that we have to configure to do the least amount of harm and provide the most amount of value that we can, because there's nothing easy about it. And I will say it was heartbreaking, and I was hoping that no one would call the police, because that was another thought that I had, and who knows, what that would have entailed. And then they wound up leaving in the middle of the night. I don't know why or where they went, but they moved on. So, and it's just very challenging. So thank you for all the work that you're doing, and there'll be difficult decisions and conversations and ideas and thoughts, and hopefully we can continue to support what you're doing. So thank you for what you told us today. It's very helpful.
Councilmember Johnson.
I really appreciate that. And I would also add my thanks and think, that's where the disparities start, right? You don't have the equal starting line. Not everybody's equally prepared at the starting line. So it's generational. And that's why, day one, when humans show up, just trying to get them where they can have an opportunity, and instead of struggling just to survive, it matters. So I appreciate what we're trying to do, and I appreciate this council, because I think we're locked step in what we're trying to do here. And I even thought too, with the minimum rents, I think it's less than $200,000 impact. We have some phenomenal business foundations out there right now that are really stepping into the affordability place, as that's now risen up on the priorities. In my world, it's our dashboard that we're tracking all of our economic indicators. And I'm just like, is there a way that businesses can be engaged, and can we receive, private monies to supplement? Maybe we can't do our own tax dollars, but is there a way to do public-private partnerships? And maybe we've done that too. I can imagine a couple major corporations headquartered here that affordability is a thing, and they might be working through the McKnight or the Minneapolis Foundation or the St. Paul Minnesota Community Foundations. I don't know, but it's everybody's problem, and we're boxed into what we can be boxed into. So I just hope through some kind of avenue we can tap into. That's one of the things I talked about when I applied for this job, is alignment. Who else out there can we iron our resources to in ways that maybe we haven't done before, to leverage more dollars and impact? So it's a soapbox, but I appreciate that story, because it's one by one by one. And I know we have a very generous business community out there. So I hope somehow it's having maximum impact in what we're trying to do.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you. One more comment on along those lines too, is the role of the faith community in dealing with this. And I know there's Beacon and is it IOCP and others that are building housing and so forth, but I had a conversation with the senior pastor through the church that I happen to attend, and he was saying, well, I'm connected with, they were various faith communities, and if we each took $1 million mortgage on our buildings, we could build X, Y, and Z for affordable housing with some homeless units and things like that. And I'm like, well, let's have this discussion. Come on. So I don't know that we are asking enough. Well, I don't think we're asking enough of anybody, actually. But I think we can also look at additional ways to engage the faith community as well as the philanthropic community, because I think that there is much more awareness now, and I think people are realizing that it is all of our. I don't like it is a problem, but I mean it's a need that all of us need to have a part in addressing, and I think more people are ready to step up and step in when they're asked, and but I think in this case he was like, well, I'm not even sure where to start, and I didn't know where to start, and so anyway, I think there are additional resources that maybe we can start to put a little bit of pressure on. There was a conversation the other day about some of the remnant parcels, maybe as we do the Green Line extension and so forth, and would those ultimately be suitable for some type of housing or something? And I know that it gets all messy and mixed up, and there are a lot of hands in the pot, and I understand all that, but I think we have to have our eyes wide open and look at everything as a possible way to address this any way that we can. So if you have ideas on how to engage the faith community further, we'll get them to mortgage their synagogue and their church and so forth.
Ms. Smith.
Chair Vento and Councilmember Cummings, we have a partnership with Beacon and have some project-based units in one of their buildings, 66 West. And we would like to do more of it. We would like to have project-based units in any of these units. I think the feds have made it clear we can't use philanthropic or business or other funding to fund vouchers.
Right.
But what we can do, if they want to fund buildings, we can provide the project-based operating subsidy so that low-income renters can live there. So that's a place where we can play a role.
So we've got one more item on the agenda yet. So other comments or questions? Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Just a quick question. Do you have the capacity to have those kinds of relationships and dialogues with organizations that have that housing? Is that something you have the capacity for currently?
Madam Chair, and I might defer to Lisa on this question.
Sure.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Madam Chair, council members, certainly around the regional table that Minnesota Housing has been supporting around homelessness, philanthropic organizations have joined that conversation, are really expressed a lot of interest in putting their money towards solving that problem in whatever way that looks like. And so that's definitely an exciting development. So it is to the capacity point, we probably do that more in partnership with Minnesota Housing, with other regional partners, and not just hold that relationship ourselves. Especially when we get to, like, how do we receive money? How do we use it? Because we're not, as you have all learned in your onboarding, the council doesn't have the simple police powers that that other governmental agencies have. We're much more limited in how we receive funds and what we can do with them. But we can figure it out creatively, is where we've kind of landed on that. And having partnerships with other agencies that have broader powers make that a lot easier to do that type of work. Long term, short term, there's a lot of things we have to work out, but we do know that certainly philanthropic organizations have entered into that in partnerships with the business community. Probably to what Harry was speaking to earlier, really having those relationships in their role as landlord is one place, and then in their role as kind of builders and developers. We regularly have conversations with different, like the Multifamily Housing Association, with the Builders Association, around what we're trying to achieve, what they're trying to achieve, and trying to align those pieces to the extent that we can, and to leverage those relationships into work. that's certainly something that we're always looking to do, with varying degrees of success over the years.
I guess, but what I'm wondering about is within the staff structure right now, is there someone who has time dedicated to figuring out leveraging partnerships and making those come to life? Or is it kind of like the thing you do when you have some time and it kind of works out? Just because it's not private public leveraging strategies are complex and they take, frankly, a dedicated staff role. And so that when I ask that question about capacity, do we have someone who has time dedicated to figuring out that possibility?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Alice Ingebrigtsen, we have capacity within a lot of different staff depending on what the partnership is. So we'll have project leads or staff leads on different areas. For example, we have a couple of different joint powers agreements we're working on with Minnesota Housing right now that involve partnerships for bringing in different funds and getting them out to different places. And different staff are leading those partnerships. Keeping track of all of them is part of my job, and making sure that I know when our staff are working with different agencies and where they're at and getting them there. And certainly Terry's team, as she was talking about with landlords in particular, that is work that she and her team do. So it's part of it is coordinating amongst ourselves. We do have in our vision a housing integration team where it's staff across all our different departments who work on and touch housing in different ways, from planning to funding to housing choice vouchers, where we're regularly talking about who's talking to who and who's doing what, and keeping all of our ducks in order. But it's not just a single partnership. And certainly across the council, there are other partnerships that we're doing in different divisions as well, that our regional administrator and our different division directors are also involved in. So we all hold pieces of that as part of our jobs.
Councilmember Johnson.
And just so one of the first things we all got to do is sit on these review committees as we were putting on people on our advisory committees. So I was helping do LUAC, which was a blast. But, we had an appointee that was put on there that is with United Properties. And I happen to know the Pollad Family Foundation, who owns United Properties, has a major focus on affordability. So when I saw one of their top VPs from real estate wanting to be on LUAC, I went, aha, we've got private sector leadership that is interested in doing our work. So I think that's too where we can embrace and get out into, other parts of the community, the private sector especially, where they have the ability to tap resources, but also to broaden our understanding in the private sector on the work we're trying to do, so that we can have it intersect not just with the philanthropic communities, but that private sector. So for me, that was like one of those moments where I'm like, ding, ding, this would be a good one. And I'm really thrilled that people like that are stepping forward too. So I just encourage, we all have relationships everywhere, but the more we can infuse all types of people that want to partner with us, the better. So that's one of the things my day job is to work with private sector and do fundraising. And so I have insights into some of the things they're trying to accomplish. And so there's pieces that we can all plug each other into one way or another. So I'm just going to try to, in my small way I can, to be helpful with that. But just reminding everybody, utilize any contacts or resources when we have these openings, so that the light bulb starts to flicker with other key leaders in this community, and they have the insights and can retell the stories back to their thought leaders and community leaders within their circles too.
I want to thank everybody for a really rich discussion. This has been excellent, and I really want to applaud Terry and Joel for a great presentation. You're helping us prepare for some tough decisions. About 25 years ago, on my first date with guy who eventually became my husband. I don't know if he was nervous or thought I was in need of a tutoring session, but on our way to a play over in Minneapolis, he made a point of pointing out Section 8 housing. And I only wish that I had had the information I have tonight back then, because I would have been much more coherent and intelligent in my response. So thank you. This was great. we gave you lots to think about and prepare for in our next presentation. So thank you both. Our next item is a family affordable housing program presentation by Terry Smith.
So I will try to move somewhat quickly through these slides as soon as it comes up, but at a previous council or CDC meeting, one of you requested that we come back and someone said, why do we own these units and what are we doing in this business? So my goal today is to help you understand why we own these units and what we're doing in this space. So the Family Affordable Housing Program is what we call it, and these are council-owned housing units, referred to as FOB. But back in 1992, some of you may recall a class action lawsuit in the city of Minneapolis, which was against the city, Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, from a group of public housing and Section 8 residents, claiming that the city and the PHA were responsible for the historical patterns of racial segregation in the city. That lawsuit resulted in a settlement, which is called the Holman Consent Decree. And essentially, that decree, the judge ordered that the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority demolish 770 units of public housing in the city and redevelop them in non-concentrated areas of both the city of Minneapolis and suburban locations. And the goal here was to demolish the units and then provide replacement housing for any residents that were displaced during this process. And so during that time, starting in 1995 to 1998, there was really a regional effort to meet the terms of the consent decree. Lots of regional partners were involved, including the council. And replacement units, as a result, were developed by regional partners, including the council, Washington County, Carver County, of course, MPHA, as part of that effort. So during this process, the council committed to developing 150 units of public housing. So these were scattered site public housing units. The Minnesota statute, as it was written back then, provided the council with the authority to develop these units as public housing. And really it was about starting, developing, and operating a public housing program, something we hadn't done in the past. So for 40 years, we had been administering the rent assistance programs, the housing choice voucher program, but we had never been in the business of owning housing. So in January 1999, there was another action in January 2000 that established the Family Affordable Housing Program. So it was the council's approval under the Jesse Ventura administration to develop these housing units. So the council hired a development manager or development director, literally went out on the open housing market and purchased 150 units of housing on the open housing market between 2001 and 2004. So where did the money come from? So the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority was awarded funds to redevelop all of these units. So they passed through 28 million of that to the council. So we had $28 million to go out and buy these units. It didn't quite cover it, so we raised some additional funds through grants through Minnesota Housing, some philanthropic dollars, some other public money, but the total development cost was about $30 million. We established unit purchase criteria back then, so in terms of where will we purchase these units, and some of the goals of that time were to purchase units outside of areas of concentrated poverty, to purchase units within close proximity to public transportation opportunities, so bus, light rail, even dial-a-ride services were continued at that time. And then also the goal was to purchase units that were near schools, groceries, banking, recreational facilities, and other services for the future occupants of those homes. The state statute required us to receive prior city approval before developing these units within any city. I would say one of the bigger challenges in the beginning was to get city approval from cities for the council to develop these units in their city. And where we ended up after a couple of different iterations, and I was around back then, I wasn't involved in these initial discussions, but I was employed here in the Section 8 department and eventually took a new job in the development department to help bring all these units online. So it was a really I would say one of the highlights of my career was being creative and setting up the operational side of this program. We had another person that did all the development and purchasing of units, but I purchased a handful of them, so it was quite an undertaking. But we did finally land on, after different iterations, we focused on cities that had affordable housing need to be met. And so that's how the cities were chosen back then, and we ended up in 11 cities and 3 counties, which I will show you here. We have cooperation agreements in place with all of these cities. Some of them have a Section 8 program, so their own voucher program. Some of them have their own public housing units, and then they have the council in the city operating this public housing program. There are 2 cities in Anoka County, Blaine and Coon Rapids. We have several cities there in Hennepin County, and then we have in Ramsey County, Roseville and Shoreview. The unit numbers, I'm not exactly sure how we came about the unit numbers, but I think it was available what was on the open housing market at that time, what the cities would agree to in negotiation with us. And at any rate, these are where we own the 150 units. They're all, we have single family homes and townhomes, so 82 are single family homes, 68 are townhomes, and those townhomes, for the most part, are located in common interest communities. So we have about 50 different common interest communities that we're working in, which can be somewhat of a challenge that I'll get into in a few more slides. And these units have anywhere from 2 to 5 bedrooms. So we're housing families with children. We don't have any single bedroom units. And the bedroom size split is on this slide. And these units, some of them were brand new. We were the first homeowner in some of these units, but that was not the norm. Some of them are as old as 1941, older single family homes. When we purchased the units, just a bit of history, when we purchased the units, we would have a team of folks go in and do an inspection of the unit, determine what items needed to be brought up to code, figure out what improvements could be made to make it in a good rental unit for a future family. This is a map. I know it's hard to see, but it gives you an idea of where the units are located. You can see they're truly scattered site units. One of the unit criteria when we purchased them were our goal was to purchase units where no 2 were closer than a quarter of a mile apart. Because remember, the goal of the consent decree was to deconcentrate poverty and housing. And so this was the true scattered site nature of that.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I represent the East Metro, so of course I'm going to ask this question.
Sure.
How come most of them are in the West Metro? And could there be a chance that if demographics and needs change that we somehow move or consider getting sites in the East Metro?
Chair Vento and Councilmember Lee, Washington County was a partner in this, so they have 109 units, I think, in their county. So there are 109 units in Washington County. But in terms of other East Metro communities, I guess I'd have to look into the answer to that on exactly how the cities were chosen. The knowledge that I have is it was based on affordable housing need at that time.
Okay, thanks.
So there are some challenges that came with this. Of course, I would say one of them was that units were developed as public housing. The council didn't have a public housing program. We never owned housing before, so we were getting into whole new territory and really starting from square one in terms of how to own and operate housing. So we just hit the pavement running and met with partners to figure out how to be a landlord. And in the end, we figured that out, the operational part. I think one of the big challenges was dealing with lots of NIMBYism from neighboring homeowners at the time. When we'd purchased the unit, they could see on the tax rolls that the council was the new owner of this unit next to them. And so we dealt with a lot of that. I would say every single day I would get phone calls from neighboring homeowners with concerns about these units being purchased in their neighborhood. And I would say once the units went into development or into operation, so once the unit was occupied, for the most part, those phone calls went down. And today we hardly ever get phone calls. I mean, certainly with owning 150 units, we do at times have phone calls. We do at times have neighbors with people in common interest communities. And so I don't want to say there aren't any issues, but it's nowhere near what we had when we first purchased them. But we made it through that. Um, Negotiations with the cities, I talked about that, was a bit of a challenge in the beginning. And then I think one of the biggest things was the federal funding for scattered site public housing was not enough to cover our costs. And that was true from day one. And so for years, we operated this public housing program at a deficit of about $250,000 a year and it was at that time where Section 8 was funded fully. And so the Section 8 program helped pay for these units. One day I was in my office reading an article in the Real Estate Journal, and I read an article about San Diego Housing Commission and how they voluntarily converted some of their public housing units to project-based vouchers. And they were the first housing authority in the nation to do this, and how their units were now cash flowing. So I picked up the phone and called this attorney in Washington, D.C., who helped them accomplish that, said, can you help us look at this and figure this out? That was in 2008. 2 years later, we were able to convert all of our units from public housing to Section 8 project-based vouchers. So they got out from underneath all of the public housing rules and regulations. Residents received the same benefit. They continued to pay 30% of their income towards rent. And in fact, under the voucher program, they could now, if they wanted to move from that location, they could have a voucher and move with them. So we got 150 additional vouchers, attached them to these units, and the units now cash flow and continue to cash flow and have become strong assets within their communities. This is a timeline. I've talked about all of these things, but from the 1995 when the consent decree was ordered by the judge, and 2010 when we converted the units. Now in 2019, we still have 150 units of housing in the same locations as when we purchased them. And I would say they're in good condition for their age. We recently had what we call a physical needs assessment done earlier this year. We just got the results of that we're working through with Heather in the budget office to try and come up with a plan for taking care of these units into the future. We have done capital improvements on these each year with funding that the units have generated. In terms of occupancy, the Family Affordable Housing Program has a separate waiting list, separate from the Section 8 program. So that's one of the areas where the council has discretion. Do we want to use the big Section 8 waiting list for these units, or do we establish a separate list? We used to use the Section 8 waiting list. We now have a separate list. That list last opened in 2017. During that opening, we did targeted outreach to all the Section 8 waiting list applicants at that time, so they would have opportunity to apply. We received 4,498 applications. 2,000 were randomly placed on the list, and it really depends on unit turnover because they're all occupied. And so as we have units come available, we do outreach to our waiting list by bedroom size. So if we have a 3-bedroom come open, we do outreach to X number of families on the 3-bedroom waiting list and do applicant screening and those sorts of things. On a plus side, downside for families that are waiting for a unit because we haven't had many turnovers. From a budgetary standpoint, on the upside is that we've only had 4 unit turnovers this year. And I'll get into why I think some of that is, but turnovers can be really expensive, anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000, depending on what's happening in that home. Tenants pay 30% of their income towards rent and utilities, just like the voucher program. Income eligibility, they need to be at or below 50% of area median income, same as the voucher program, which is $50,000 for a family of 4. And resident selection criteria, we did quite a bit of revision to this in 2016 with the effort and goal of screening families in and not screening families out, and really looking at what our criteria are for occupancy of these units. And so we're happy with the results of that. And then these units, we're doing some post-move assistance. So as families move into these units, we are doing the best we can to set them up for success. So we've been implementing these, what we're calling harm reduction strategies over the last few years to work with residents towards success. So for example, if a family doesn't pay their rent, instead of filing an eviction or sending them a termination notice, we'll work with them and set them up with our outreach team to go through some financial literacy training to help them develop a budget that they can work with their family and help them find a way to be able to pay their rent instead of going to termination. If a family has some housekeeping issues or has some damage to unit, instead of terminating their lease for damaging their unit, we're going to set them up with some services within the community to help them learn how to maintain their home and be a successful resident. And so I think those strategies that we've entertained in the last 2 years have really impacted the resident success. And we've only had one eviction in the last 24 months, which I think is a good statistic to share. So where are we today? We have these units that are managed by a private management company. Their name is Greenwood Management. They were selected through a competitive RFP, and they've been our manager since 2006, I think. We had an initial company when we first went into operations, and they didn't work out so well. We ended up ending their contract and doing another RFP. I will say it's very challenging to get a management company that wants to manage a scattered site program like this. It's very expensive to operate. For example, if you're going from Blaine in a single family home to fix a toilet to Eden Prairie, the structures are different, the fixtures are different. It costs a whole lot more than if you're going in a high-rise building from first floor to fifth floor to fix a toilet. So it's a time-consuming portfolio to manage, and every time we've done an RFP, we've done extensive outreach to lots and lots and lots, hundreds of management companies, and we either get interest with a price tag that's very steep, but I would say we've had a very successful partnership with Greenwood Management since about 2006. Their contract is up in 2023, I believe, so we'll be doing an RFP in 2022 again, but they do a really nice job with managing these units. Physical needs assessment I talked about. We hired a national consultant to go in and do a formal inspection of all 150 units to look at capital improvement items, energy efficiency, any deferred maintenance, all of those kinds of things. And we have a report about this thing now that we're weeding through to determine setting up a potential capital fund reserve for this program. But the units are in good condition, have been well maintained by our management company. We have an inspector in there once a year. We also do have staff that do housekeeping inspections and yard inspections, so we have our finger on the pulse of the unit conditions. But I think there's a need to plan for the future, so we'll be having a future discussion on what those capital needs are and what role you can all play in that, but certainly setting up a capital fund to maintain them for years to come. Here are some pictures of some of the units that we own. They're very nice units. I guess I have 2 townhomes, or 3 single-family homes and 1 townhome unit shown here. Residents are responsible for upkeep of the yard, so they mow the grass, maintain their yards. One's the units in the association generally covers that, but I would say there are different challenges and different ups and pros and cons of the single family homes versus the townhomes, but I would say they balance each other out. And that includes my formal comments. I'm happy to answer questions.
I have one question. Would it be realistic for us as a council to, and with the staff, of course, to have a conversation about replicating this or increasing this model, say ×2 by 2023? If we were able to find public-private partnerships, the philanthropic entities, corporate world, religious communities, pull together a partnership to do something like this and create another 150 opportunities for families.
Chair Vento, I would say it's in our powers, in our statutory authority to develop units like we did back in 2001. And so I think that would be a discussion for the council to be having. I know you're going to be receiving an email, and maybe Lisa wants to talk about this coming soon for initiatives that council members are interested. And so certainly could be something the council could entertain.
I have to call myself here. Has this ever been considered before?
Chair Vento, I would say briefly, when the topic of money has come up in the past, because we don't have the money to develop, we back, 20 or whatever, 2000, so almost 20 years ago, cost $30 million to develop these units, probably double that now. I mean, I don't know, we'd have to have some market analysis done, but that's kind of as far as the conversation has gone. We've talked about if we have some units that are have constant maintenance issues or constant neighbor issues due to issues. Should we be selling some units and purchasing them somewhere else? So we've had some of those conversations, but it's still the original 150 unit.
Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Have we looked into utilizing properties that we own and providing them as incentives for affordable housing development? Where we have property that's not developed, like vacant, unused land.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, I know our TOD office in Metro Transit has done a survey of available inventory, and I believe has been in front of your group as a full council to provide both at least information on the full scale of both public property, but property that the council owns, which we do own a lot. Obviously, not just for transit, but for regional wastewater service that we're not going to put houses on. They serve other purposes. But the TOD office has also done some prioritization on some of the inventory that's ready for disposition that could be used. Now I'm trying to think of when that was. I think it was before your term started. So last fall had brought a list to the council for kind of prioritization to look at joint development in particular. So using FTA authorities to do some joint development projects, but not in particular for necessarily only affordable housing. As you know, earlier this year when we had conversation, I believe it was at a committee of the whole, council members, you and your colleagues had also expressed interest in some of that land that was being made available for disposition, just for outright sale, and whether we might use that for affordable housing. As staff, our Mary Bogey and our legal team and I have had some kind of continued conversations on what would we need to kind of get out of the way, what hurdles do we need to overcome on how we've acquired transit properties in particular in order to actually be able to do some of these things, because there are, when you get funding from lots of different sources, there's lots of strings attached to all those fundings that get very tangled. So essentially, how do we disentangle those strings, and can we then make that land available, or can we put up for sale with a request for more housing projects, is kind of the first question. So that's what we're working on right now, is kind of going through those, and there's some pieces that we need some legislative changes to do in order to untangle that. Some of that is maybe more in the rule stage with MMB when state bonds are involved in pieces. And then there's the follow-up question on what does the council want to do with that? And is the land that we have as these excess parcels actually the land where we want to develop affordable housing? Does it meet all of the criteria that this council would have in mind as priority areas for affordable housing? So there's the can we, and then there's the do we want to question that we're at least trying to take away the barriers that we can at this point, so you can have the do we want to conversation.
Would that list that was shared with the previous council be shared with this council?
Yes. Madam Chair, I'm happy to find that for council members and that forward for you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Cummings.
Um, Yes, and I have no idea what my question was. So.
Well, when you think of it at 3,
I'll raise my hand again.
Yeah, don't call you.
Call
right?
Sue.
call me. I'll be awake. Councilmember Johnson.
And I think, so I'm interested, going back to the discussion about the aging housing and the capital. So there is no capital reserve for these homes, or there is, but just if we could explain that a bit for me.
So Councilmember Chair Vento and Councilmember Johnson, we have been paying for annual capital improvements. I don't know if I'm going to say it right. I'm going to call Heather up. She's our budget guru. But there are some FOP reserves built up over the years, but do you want to?
Council member, committee members, excuse me, chair committee members, that's going to be part of the conversation this year. There has been maintenance, like Terry said, the facilities are in pretty good shape right now. Those are operational dollars that have been run through our operating budget. But we do know we want to have really high levels of asset management in the long run. So that's going to be part of the conversation we're going to be bringing before you with our capital budget. And one of the new items that we're going to be proposing for your consideration is that we do have some dedicated capital dollars that are set aside in a capital account, so we can make sure that we're making sure that we're doing roofs and just some of these really bigger capital projects that we know that are coming, and sometimes hail comes and that takes care of the roofs, but other times we're going to need to get ahead of that, and we're going to be coming before you in October to get into that in more detail about what do the costs look like, what do the funding options look like, where may those resources come from.
And just to follow up, I'm almost amazed that we've gotten along this far without much of, that many assets out there. So you must have purchased really well. And I would say that as we look to expand and maybe double this, or, continue to own properties, there's a caveat with that too. Are we the right people to do it? Is there a better partner out there that's really good at this, that we can lean in and put covenants around things and be, a partner in it without taking on the burden of owning properties and then having to care for properties? It's a whole different ball game. So I'm interested in any of those options in the future. And especially, with becoming, I'm just curious too if even with the purchase of these, when you become a landowner, you can still put covenants on things too, so that there can be in perpetuity affordable housing should we ever want to get out of one and go somewhere else. So I'm just all the tools in the tool belt. I guess I'm interested as we manage these and then look at other ways to expand. And especially I'm interested, I think it's great that we're doing this, but I also know you really have to be in the game. It's a different game when you're, owning and managing property and all that comes along with it. I know our HRA does it at the city, and yet it's just, you got to be in your wheelhouse to do it well.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say I really appreciate Lisa's comments updating us about the staff conversations about how we hold on to land and what we could possibly use it for these purposes. Because, I love soccer, and I'm just going to pick on the soccer team for example. Right? They'll lease the bus barn site from us for 99 years, but we know that all pro sports stadiums have a 20-25 year life. Right after that, they're going to up and leave. Any moment, the franchise or the owner could also move. In the last year, the city of Oakland has basically lost all of its pro sports team. So we have to be creative about what we do with our land. Thank you.
Good comments. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I remembered my question. Why do we maintain a separate waiting list, and how do people know about this separate from Housing Choice?
Smith.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Cummings, we used to have take names from the general Section 8 waiting list, and it became challenging because we have 2,000 names on the list. We have a 3-bedroom unit available in Blaine. We would go through hundreds of names and hundreds of people and lots of administrative process to find somebody that wants to live in Blaine, for example. And so what we did instead is we would market, when we opened our Section 8 waiting list last time, we opened, well, wait a minute now, because FOP opened in 2017. In 2015, when we opened the Section 8 waiting list, we opened FOP at the same time, and we broke it down into zones. So we said, do you want to apply for Section 8? Do you want to apply for a council-owned housing unit? In which zone would you be interested in? We broke it down into 4 different areas of the region. So people could say, I want to live in these areas or these areas, but not these or these. So then it became more easier for us to administer and less burdensome for families who are getting constant letters from us. Do you want this unit? Do you want this unit? So I would say that's the main reason. And then when we opened again in 2017, we marketed to all existing Section 8 waiting list applicants to see if they're interested in getting on that list. But then we also did separate outreach. But I think it's really because they need to want the unit that we have available.
Right.
And that is kind of how that came about.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Along the capital investment funding theme, one strategy that many, particularly larger local governments, utilize is a revolving loan fund for energy efficiency improvements. So if you change out your lights at City Hall to LEDs, those savings, which you know what they will be over time, go into the revolving loan fund to fund other energy efficiency improvements in the future. And I'd encourage you to think about that strategy moving forward.
Thank you.
Anything else? Again, Terry Smith, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We know why you got that award. And before we adjourn tonight, I want to thank Michelle Winter. I don't know how you do it, but you keep track of all of this and you come up with great minutes. So thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Madam Chair, council members, I wanted to let you know, and we'll send this out in email as well, that before the start of our next CDC meeting, we'll be having an intern open house here in front of Chambers. We've had, oh shoot, now I promised myself I'd remember how many interns we've had this year in community development. I think it's 8, maybe 9. But our interns have been working on some really great work, and we like to give them an opportunity to share their work with our council members. We don't scare them by making them present in front of you, but having an open house ahead of time and letting them share with you your tweets and having info. Sorry, I was thinking about dinner. Sharing their work and having informal conversations with you both is a great development opportunity for them, but also a good way for us to showcase the work that our staff are able to do in the summer. So we'll be sending out additional information that starts at 3:30, just outside of Chambers here, at our next CDC meeting.
Mr. Lindstrom.
In the Environment Committee, we like to scare our interns, and we we make them all give 1-minute presentations, which I'm sure terrifies them, but we find great value in it. But certainly, and then they have the poster sessions out in the lobby too. So definitely encourage everybody to come a little bit early for that.
That's great. Anything else? Meeting's adjourned.